You're listening to the History Things Podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit hole of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the guys on social media by searching at the History Things Podcast. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Matt and Pat are coming right up. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to the History Things Podcast. I'm your co-host, Matt Borders, and with me, as always, is the Danger Ranger himself, Pat McGuire.
Matt, that was the best one you've come up with yet. The entire time you've been trying to freewheel that was a win. Give me a dap right there. That was a good one. I'm excited to be here, Matt. We have, we've got summer going now. We're past the mid-year point, and we are kicking off the second half of Season 5 here with an absolute banger. Very excited for the guest we have in studio today. Very excited to finally be getting to this topic. Before we even get to our guest, Matt, what are we talking about today, dude?
Well, we're talking about the third Confederate incursion into the North in 1864. It's a great site outside of Frederick, Maryland.
Careful what you say, buddy.
Absolutely. And it is, of course, Monocacy National Battlefield.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one, man. Obviously, we have some very deep connections that we will never acknowledge directly or indirectly. What, are you confused? Good. But this is a story that is something Matt and I have been passionate about even before somebody may or may not have worked there or near it or around it. It's just one of those stories that I think it's often overlooked, even with the amount of good work that's been done recently to elevate the story. I still think this is one of the quieter stories when it comes to the American Civil War. Interesting word choice you used there, incursion. I'm familiar with the word invasion.
Right.
Interesting that you went with incursion. Why'd you do that?
Partially because it's not the entire Confederate Army. It is a portion of the Confederate Army, maybe a third of it.
All right.
So I don't know if invasion is the term. So I've been kind of testing incursion when it comes to the Monocacy campaign.
I dig it. It's kind of like how we're trying to use U.S. troops a little bit more.
Right, exactly.
And stuff like that when we interpret the American Civil War fight. So let's get into the excitement of today, not just the story of the Battle of Monocacy, Junction 1864, but we have a pretty legendary storyteller with us.
We do.
Somebody that we know obviously very closely. You may or may not work with this person at said top secret site. And it's been a long time coming. I think we've been asking you to come on the show now for a little bit. A little bit in quotes is a long time. But ladies and gentlemen, we have Matt. You got to do the introduction, Bodie. It's yours.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have one of my coworkers and a longtime friend of mine, Tracy Evans, with us here in studio. Tracy, welcome to the History Things Podcast.
Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm excited to finally be here.
I'm excited. I'm excited you're finally here because Matt doesn't understand that, he's got bosses in life. He's rogue sometimes, and I need to rein him in.
That's obviously
Matt goes kind of rogue on the microphone here. It's definitely never me. So it's good to have you in studio to keep this man under, kind of confinement.
You think I'm going to be able to
stay
control
focused,
that?
damn it, Matt.
Yeah.
What is it like working with Matt? Matt, when I get to work with him, is in the let your hair down time, and neither Matt or I have a lot of hair to let down. One of the things I'm most impressed with about him is his just commitment to detail at all the things that he does. Is he the same way at work, or is he kind of just like F off and like you got to remind him what to do?
No, I have to tell him, go home.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's good.
That has happened.
That's
before.
pretty on brand for you.
Stop working.
Well, that's why we enjoy the brilliance of Matt Borders, either at the site or through his books or here on the show. So, but when this is done, Matt, you have to go home.
Yes.
Like you cannot stay here.
No.
All right.
Yeah, I told him today, you need to go.
All right. Well,
He was ready today, though, I think.
Yeah. Well, because he knows that if he doesn't get up here,
Yes, then I get all sorts of...
he gets the knuckle sandwich.
Oh, so maybe I need to get some... No, he's at work before I am, so I can't do that.
But you can just flex. Be like, I'm his boss. You're fired. But you're rehired tomorrow. I'll see you in the morning. That's what, you know.
There's no way I'm getting rid of him.
That's the way you do it. So, Tracy, I'm very excited to have you on the show. My first experience at said top secret battlefield in Frederick, Maryland was actually you. I don't know if you remember this story here, but I came in one day and it had been raining most of the morning. Programs were probably not happening most of the morning. I think I showed up for the 11 o'clock talk and I was the only person there. And I got like a one-on-one. Let me tell you about this. We sat out front by the cannon and you basically told me the battles. Yeah, it was you. You were the only person.
I remember that.
Yeah, I was the awkward. You're like, who is this dude who will not leave? Like, don't you go home? No. But that was awesome because that was really my first introduction to the story. Like, I knew a little bit about it, but like I heard the broad story and I fell in love with it right there. So firstly, thank you for that. And right away, I kind of fell in love with the way you tell stories and got to know you over the last few years. And when we launched the show, it just was like, why are we not having you in studio? And Tracy, you fought it, and now you're here. I don't know.
You can blame my kid.
I don't want to blame your kid because I don't blame my kids. Kids are wonderful.
I blame everything on him.
Can we give a shout out to your buddy? Can we give a shout out to your boy here?
My boy?
Yeah, give a shout out to your son.
Oh, yes, my 10-year-old Ethan.
Hey, Ethan, thanks for listening to the show. Your mom is a rock star.
He stopped listening a while ago.
Yeah, he heard you talking. He was like, "This guy's cool," and then, "Oh, that's Matt." Yeah. Anyway.
Is this a game?
Yeah.
No. Oh, I'm done.
That's pretty much your average kid today. My oldest especially, is hitting into that, oh, is this not directly engaging? I'm out. Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into it today, Tracy. You are, I guess, I don't know what I'm really looking to say here, but you were going to be the lead storyteller for this really neat story that I alluded to in the beginning that people kind of overlook. So, as we always do with our guests, when we toss the conversation to get going to you, every story's got a beginning. Multiple people can change where their beginning is, but you're our storyteller today. So where do you start the beginning of the, Battle of Monocacy Junction, July 9th, 1864? But where do you start that story and when you tell it?
Well, first let me say thank you for sharing about your first experience at the park.
Oh, did you not remember that?
I'm
an elephant, Tracy. I don't forget anything.
Oh, my.
That was a good edit point.
You have to. I've been there 20 plus years. Sorry.
At the same battlefield?
At the same battlefield.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Was it at the current visitor center or the original?
No, it was here. It was in the barn. It was where you guys are now.
Okay.
I mean, allegedly where you are now.
Allegedly.
Right. Allegedly.
Okay. Gosh, well, I like to start with the English Civil War.
Oh man, let's go back.
I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I'm down.
Although it has come up.
It has come up.
In terms of the Civil War.
Yep.
You're like, not that war, guys.
Yeah,
Different
not
war.
that war. You know what? Honestly, when I talk about the battlefield, I don't normally start with the campaign. I start with the landscape.
All right.
And how the war affected the people there and why it came to that particular area.
What is Monocacy Junction by the time of the American Civil War, then? Maybe a good question to start with. Like, what is it? What kind of town is it?
Well, the junction itself is a good question. I think in itself was a small town because it had the railroad station there. The telegraph station was there. I mean, there's a family who, he runs the station and his family's there. And, but then you've got all the workers, on the railroad. And then for most of the war, you have a presence of soldiers.
Right.
So, for 9 months out of the war, you had the 14th New Jersey, who were present and very involved, knew the people, knew the community. And then even when they weren't there are, companies of soldiers from varying places who are there to protect the railroad, being the B&O Railroad and our first railroad and the first bridge of its kind that goes over a river and then splits so that there's like 3 tracks and trains could turn around. And so it's strategically in the war very important for moving supplies and troops, and that's why there's blockhouses there, and that's why we have military presence there. You have the Georgetown Pike, which is the main road between Frederick and Washington, and you see armies on that road every year of the war. Right. And so it is a huge impact on the people who live in that area. And I will say there is going to be a new museum at this site. And it will be probably somewhere after Thanksgiving. And the one thing that will be spoken of there
That was a good catch. That was a good catch, Tracy. I like that.
Yeah. And one of the things that are going to be interpreting is making sure that we get that connection between the civilian population and the military population, because they were so integral together.
Right.
And in particularly with the battle and the 62 campaign, I mean, we see stories that they're both part of. You can't separate the two in many cases.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, directly from the most famous civilian story you tell directly related to the battle is the Worthingtons, right? Glenn in the basement, things like that. As you were talking right there, it's not directly on the grounds of the modern battlefield or park or whatever, but the same regiment, the 14th New Jersey, out in Mount Airy, gets involved in a bit of a civilian military, there's people bringing booze from the civilian world into the soldiers. Idle soldiers are getting a little bit out of hand. It turns into a big thing.
It's a kerfuffle.
Yeah, and I believe there's some public humiliation as a punishment for some of the buffoonery taking place, but it's that interaction between the people that live in these places and the military that occupies these places. Before we continue, you brought up the 14th New Jersey. It's irrelevant to our story, so it's a good time to bring it up now before we get into the weeds. But I looked up where that unit was from specifically, and I found they came from a pretty interesting place in New Jersey, Freehold, New Jersey. And I happen to be a big Bruce Springsteen fan. So I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I wonder if there's any connections or familial connections to this. And sure as hell, Matt got on the case and found out that Bruce Springsteen's either second or third time great grandfather, direct relative, is in that regiment at Monocacy Battlefield in 1864. It's like,
sure is.
There's the boss's boss.
Right. So has anybody reached out to him?
I literally said, Matt, this is the way we get Bruce Springsteen on the show, is we found this. You need to come to the battlefield. You need to come to the podcast. Bruce, listen, I paid a lot of money to see you last year. All right? Listen, buddy, it was a great show. I think you owe it to us to come to Maryland. Lifelong fan. Like Baltimore Jack, all that, except you know how I feel about Baltimore. But come on our show, go to the battlefield, and just say you're welcome, dude. You're welcome. Thank you for the music. You should thank us for doing the genealogy.
He could get a really good tour of the battlefield, and then write a song about it.
And then I will just
that.
fanboy the whole time. You guys do the real work and just let me be there, and I would be very grateful.
You could just have your guitar in the background, just
I'll play his songs.
Yeah, just playing background
I'm sure he would
music.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Like he's like, you're telling him about the fight, and I'm playing like Atlantic City right in the background, and he's like, dude, I'm trying to listen. And I'm like, meet me tonight. He's like, shut up. Anyway, that would be cool. But so I thought that was neat. Is like another way for me to be in love with this place is like it directly connects to something in my modern world. Like music is a huge part of me, and no matter what you think about me as a metalhead, Bruce is my favorite artist, songwriter, performer of all time. And it's like, wow, his direct existence hinged at one point on this fight in July of 1864. Like if that guy goes down, we don't get the music today.
And considering the casualties the 14th New Jersey sustains at Monocacy, he is fortunate that he doesn't go down.
I would bet he'd be extremely interested in knowing that. But I will say I had heard that little tidbit of news.
Oh, you have?
And I may or may not have sent somebody down a rabbit hole to see if any other famous people
Oh. Did you dig up anybody?
had relatives.
All right, well, we'll find out. But
who's famous from New Jersey?
we'll get our Bon Jovi. That's probably about it, is Bon Jovi.
Oh, you would be surprised how many. John Travolta.
No, I believe it. I mean, honestly.
There was a whole slew of people.
I'd never heard of the town
Danny
of...
DeVito.
Yeah.
Danny DeVito.
Well, that makes sense because his somehow related relative of Tommy DeVito, Giants quarterback, third string, same last name. But you're right, because I'd never heard of the town of Schenectady, New York before. Years ago, I met one person, friend of mine, and she's like, I'm from this town, Schenectady. I was like, cool, never heard of it. Apparently, everybody is from Schenectady, like random linebackers, random musicians. It's just like you meet somebody, they're like, I'm from Schenectady. You go to an antique store in Fayetteville, Pennsylvania, and they got this really cool Fireman's Commission, which, by the way, is from 1863, right in the middle of the war. Like, it reminds me, sometimes you got to keep the boys home because there's stuff happening at home, too. So they kept some of the firefighters home. Where? Schenectady, New York. Why is this in Pennsylvania? But it's like, oh, snap. So I guess there's definitely more than just Bruce and John Bon Jovi from New Jersey.
That's true.
But do any of them matter other than those two? Yeah, the crickets there speak volumes.
You hate crickets.
I do hate crickets. That's another day. We'll have our producer, Parker, reach out to Bruce. We'll make sure our buddy gets on that. But So if you start with the landscape and you start with its people, do you have a particular story inside of that you like to go to, a particular moment in time, 1859, 61? Where do we go?
I actually kind of like to talk about the 14th New Jersey only because they connect the campaigns together in a sense, because they arrive on site days before the Confederates are going to arrive in 1862.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So they're right in front of it.
Yeah, they're right in front of it. And then they're obviously ordered to skedaddle because they're one regiment. Right. And then after the Battle of Antietam, they're going to, guard some of the prisoners until they're either, taken to prison, or they're, going to be, sign your little thing saying I won't be in the war anymore, I promise, and go home.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Tear that paper up as soon as I turn the corner, buddy.
How much do I get for signing up again?
Yeah, right. I was going to say, then there's bounty hopping like crazy. Yeah, I'll be back in this one in a few. Don't worry.
But they're there until just after the Battle of Antietam, or the Battle of Gettysburg.
Oh, so they spend a good amount of time there.
So they spend a good amount of time there, and then they leave, and then they end up, ironically, back there for the Battle of Monocacy. So they're kind of the thread that kind of goes through it. And, we know some specifics about some of the people who were there and how they were connected to the families. So
are they billeted in homes the way the British were billeted in homes during the Revolution? Like, do you have soldiers, or there's a camp?
Not there. They had a camp.
Okay.
Camp Hooker.
Oh, nice. Solid name. Not named for the action happening there.
Right.
But maybe the action was happening there. But
I don't know. Under Friedenberg, I'm not sure if that would have been allowed. I think he was rather strict.
Straight-laced.
Yeah, he was pretty straight-laced.
So then it was definitely happening, because those dudes need to blow off steam because they got the dude cracking the whip on them the whole time.
Now, one of them did walk home from Frederick, I believe, drunk, and got hit by a train.
That didn't go well for him, I'm guessing.
That walk did not end well.
Was it the end of his story?
I think so. I would say it was the end of the road, but that doesn't really go with the story.
I just can't imagine a story where you get hit by a train and there's a part two, other than like you got buried. They picked up part of you and then buried you.
Well, somebody was partially buried when they tried to blow up the railroad bridge in 62.
All right.
Yeah, when they arrived on site. I think it was some of the 14th New Jersey, wasn't it? Was it them that wrote that letter? There's a letter.
It is one of them.
About that was like the first Confederate dead that they had seen, and he was like half buried.
Like World War I style, like they could shake his hand?
I mean, that's
I don't know if it was quite that
what
dramatic.
It gave off, but yeah, and that was from when they blew up the bridge, and somebody didn't friendly fire.
Right.
Did they? Yeah. So did they? Wait, did they successfly blow up the bridge in 62?
I mean, they disrupted it for a little while, and it was metal, and they had to hurry up and rebuild it with wood, and but I mean, they disrupted it for a few days, but I don't think ultimately it was really what they had hoped for.
The 62 destruction is much more extensive than what we'll see in 64.
Right.
The 64 damage is very minimal, but 62 they actually do break the thing for a little bit.
Well,
but Tracy's right, they build a wooden temporary bridge that works quite well until they get the iron
I'm
bridge
sure we'll
back
get
up
to
and
it, or it might not be relevant, but there's a big difference between the styles of the invasions in 62 and 64. In 62 it's a much bigger army, and they're intending to spend a lot more time in that region and points further north. And in 64, I mean, they're essentially making a last gasp run on Washington. So
they're trying not to piss too many people off in 62 as well. In 64, they don't care.
Yeah,
it's true. When did they burn the newspaper? 62 campaign?
The newspaper in Frederick?
Yeah, 62. Yeah. Irrelevant, just placing it in my brain for the sake of this conversation. Against you pros, you legends of the top secret site here. I'm just trying to elevate my amateur brain to stay focused.
The deceased Confederate that Tracy's referring to, they talk about him having a big chunk of his head gone, because apparently he was too close to the bridge when they set off the gunpowder charges, because there's no TNT or anything yet. And he had a chunk of metal take a piece of his head with him.
They were
what not to do next time.
They were like, damn, Johnny down. Duck. Somebody said duck, and it was like after the fact.
Right.
They're like, uh-oh. Oh, well. Listen, man, war is grisly. We can spend a lot of time focusing on that. If you don't know that yet, you're in the wrong conversation. War sucks.
Right.
Sometimes you kill your own people. Whatever.
And that was part of the secondary objectives for the 62 campaign.
Kill your own people?
No, the disruption of the logistics for the federal states. So you see strikes against the C&O Canal, you see strikes against the B&O Railroad. Now, we will see strikes against the B&O in 64, but it's not the same idea.
Right, because I know in 62 there's some conversation about if Lee was attempting to tear up rail lines in the vicinity, somewhere probably where the modern-day CSX yard is or whatever, but I can't confirm that. I don't know, but I do know that infrastructure is always under attack.
Yeah, they tried to blow up the aqueduct.
Yeah.
That's my favorite story, because it's like, John Walker, what are you doing? You're just wasting time down here. Jackson's
powder.
like, get your ass up to Loudon Heights now.
I love the mental image of Walker's troops just trying to drill into this granite aqueduct. It's not going anywhere.
I forget, because we've had so much happen in both our professional hobby and personal lives since we took our little kayak trip down there. Did we see evidence of that drilling? Does it still remain? Or
it's also been rebuilt a couple of times. Well, not fully rebuilt, but at least restored.
That's what I was asking, because I know 35 in the big flood, it took a massive hit, but didn't take out the aqueduct. I just didn't know. Well, don't go looking for it. It's not there anymore.
I'm sure if you had a really in-depth document on its restoration work, you might be able to find something, but I wouldn't be able to point it out. Well, because a lot of those blocks are cut using drills to cut them, and so they've got the scars in them already.
Right. Well, we'll move on from that one. That's a rabbit hole we don't need to get down here. We'll never. I didn't bring shovels. We won't get out of that one.
Architectural restoration.
Right. Of the aqueduct.
Yeah, I'm learning a little bit of that about that process in my professional purview, and it is overwhelming. So no thanks. All right. So do you want to kick it off with the 14th and just the threat of them, or just let's rock, Tracy?
Okay.
What kind of music should we put right there? Something epic? I'm doing it. It's epic. Whatever you're hearing right now, enjoy it. Turn it up.
All right. So you want the story?
Yes. Hit me.
It all began.
Oh. Who did that? Somebody was like in the beginning, and we were like, damn.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times I kind of use the 14th New Jersey and the landscape and sort of getting up to 1864. I always mention Special Orders 191 because I can't get away from that. And then I'm like, I don't know. I don't do orientations anymore.
You gotta do those. You gotta get them back down in the mud.
An audience.
I'm all right with bringing up 191. It's one of the more important myth busts we like to do on the show, being like kind of pigeonholed into Maryland campaign kind of guys. It's what it is and what it is not, and we consistently never miss the opportunity to stress it's not a battle plan.
Right.
So like anytime you want to talk about it, we can do that, because that's something we like to do.
Well, I would, and I don't know if you know this, but I would share what I think is kind of a cool story when it came to doing the research on that. And that is, there was so much misinformation. So many secondary sources were just quoting other secondary sources, and it was like, the old game with the phone, going down and one story after another, and people changed what they had to say. And so that's one of the reasons why so much research was done on it. But ironically enough, during the time that I was doing that work, there was a guy that came in who was a descendant of Bloss, who is he's not the corporal, he's the
sergeant.
Yeah, he was the sergeant. So he's in charge of Company F, 27th Indiana. Yeah,
because Barton Mitchell's the corporal that physically
he's the one that physically picks it up. And so I have this guy come in. He's like, I'm a descendant of Bloss. I'm like, well, I'm doing some research on him. How about that?
Well, howdy, neighbor.
He's like, yeah, my cousin has this letter that he wrote 12 days after the orders were found from the barn hospital at Antietam. And I'm like, you don't say.
You're now my new best friend.
And he said, he's like, yeah, let me see if I can find. And he pulls up some stuff. And anyhow, he's like, let me get your email. He's like, and when I get home, and he was lived out near Chicago, I think. He's like, when I get home, let me find that information and I'll send it to you, see if it's any interest. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I hope he sends it. I hope he sends it, because you just never know.
Right.
Well, sure enough. And he's like, oh, and it hasn't been published.
Oh, this is new information.
So this was the closest primary source that I was aware of and of any of the research I had looked at. And it's mostly about the fighting in the cornfield at Antietam, which was awesome. And I shared it with Antietam. Mm-hmm. But there was a paragraph in it, or a couple sentences in it, where he says, oh, and Mitchell was lucky enough to come across, this order in an envelope with 2 cigars.
Oh, so now we know it's definitely 2.
He said 2, 13 days after the fact.
All right.
And he describes it being under a locust tree, like in a scrub field. And, yeah. And so I said to somebody, I'm like, a locust tree. And they were like, yeah, that's what they planted between the farm fields. That was not at all uncommon.
Right.
And so we knew that it was in an envelope, not wrapped around cigars. I went down another rabbit hole for that. That's, it quoted as a primary source from the 1880s, the Century Magazine. Mm-hmm. But Colonel Colgrove was not there when it was picked up. I think it came to him wrapped around cigars.
We have learned a lot about misidentifying primary sources or where, because we did an episode last season on Blackbeard the Pirate, and our guest basically blew that guy's entire story to smithereens, and he started with the simple fact that almost everything we know and accept about pirates as legitimate all comes from a single 1724 book that has no citations, no other primary sources. But today we are like, this is a gospel publication because it's so freaking old. Mm-hmm. Like now it's this year it's a 300-year-old book. But in that moment I was like, oh my God, like I didn't realize like you can't just take something as gospel because it's from that era or what, like you got to really dig.
Well, and it was taken from that interview and repeated and repeated and repeated until everybody thinks it was wrapped around 3 cigars.
Right.
None of which is true.
Yeah, it wasn't wrapped in it.
Maybe
Maybe
it came to him that way, but in an envelope with 2. So anyhow, some very pointed things that he says in there. And okay, so then fast forward to another day, I have a descendant of Corporal Mitchell come in.
Oh.
And he's like, my great aunt just died, and we found all of these letters.
Shut the front door.
In a drawer in her bedroom. Family's not, So what it was is that Mitchell had gone on this writing campaign post-war, trying to become recognized as the person who found the orders.
Well, he should have hooked up with Chamberlain. It would have worked out better for him.
He wanted remuneration. But the crazy part is, we don't know the letter that went to Bloss, but we have the letter that Bloss sent back to Mitchell.
Oh, that's
and you
so
can
cool.
tell in the letter that Mitchell has asked him, do you remember that I'm the one that found it? Now, so this is just a couple years, not that long, because Mitchell doesn't survive the war all that long.
Right.
I think he's dead by 67, 69.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. Yeah. And Bloss is writing back to him saying, well, I don't really remember who found that order.
Might be me that takes all the credit.
Like, you wrote a letter where you said Mitchell found it.
Well, devil's advocate. They both survived the war, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that means very likely they saw some over the next 2.5 years that might have put that detail in the back of the database.
Both saw some crap at Antietam. They're both wounded there.
But that's what I mean. It's like that one might give you a pass right before you get blown up in a cornfield. Okay, that letter makes a lot of sense. Thank you for writing it. I don't know that I hate on him for not remembering it, but
what's wild though is in the letter that Tracy's referring to, he specifically says Mitchell found this document. And the captain says it's worth what, a boatload of money or something like that?
Yeah, it's worth its weight in gold, basically.
Oh, and then Barton's like, "Let me get some of that gold." And he's like, "I don't know that it was you. Actually, maybe it was me."
You feel really bad for poor Barton Mitchell because he is writing everybody. He writes McClellan. He writes, Bloss. He's writing people in the government and this and that. And then when he dies, his son sort of takes up that mantle, and he's trying to write all these things. So, you feel kind of bad. And I also felt bad for him because he does die pretty early. And then after that, the 27th Indiana, when they're having their reunions, and then all of a sudden when people are interested of oh, who did find that order? And what were the circumstances? Because nobody cared at the time. They only cared that they found it.
He wasn't around to see it when it came
his way. He wasn't. And then they were saying that Bloss found it. And then after Bloss dies, other people want to take. But they even went so far as to say Mitchell didn't find it because he was illiterate. and he
Right.
wouldn't have known that it was meant anything.
Right. Yeah. So they kind of besmirched
Yeah.
his whole ability to even understand what
Yeah.
it was.
So
Which we're like, well, we got a drawer full of letters that tell us he wasn't illiterate. Besides the type of job he had, he worked on a railroad, and I forget what he did on that railroad, but it was a type of work you had to be able to read.
so like I also just this is maybe the rabbit hole we won't fully go into, but like we flirt with it. It's like the human condition, the human experience. Like I don't know if you guys personally know anybody that's illiterate, but I know a few old timers in my life that still cannot read. One in the town I currently live in, I see him all the time at 7-Eleven, cannot read, but he knows how to read certain words because he's seen them forever. You might not be able to have read this letter, but you probably know what an order structure looks like. You might not be able to read it, but you're like, this is kind of framed the same way all orders are written that I've ever seen, or maybe a work order, something like that.
D.H. Hill's name was on it. That's not a hard one.
But that's the other thing. It's like there's celebrity attached to it because at this point in time, almost all the big name officers are already kind of, somebodies at that point.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. In
Definitely.
62 they were.
you're recognizing these people. Even if you can't read the name, you're like, D.H. Well, I could figure out who that is.
Yeah.
So my question to you in this moment is, when I came to this story, Barton Mitchell was obviously, so this is happening in the late 19th century where his credit, his due is coming his way. This is not a more modern conversation where like we're getting it right now. So not too far after he died, did his son get to see the credit come due?
You know what? I don't think so.
Damn.
No,
So
I don't
later
think either
than
one
that.
of them did. I think that it's still...
There's a state historic marker in Indiana that talks about the finding, which does pretty much credit Bloss and Mitchell to the finding. And then I believe the family has also developed an interpretive marker next to Mitchell's headstone that or maybe it's even on the headstone itself where it says like finder of Lee's Special Orders 191.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Wikipedia's got his name, and for the lay person that's going to, that's how they're going to.
We did it. We did it.
You did that?
We did
Good
that.
for you guys. I was going to say, but that's how they're going to come to the
I don't know
story, and
about
his name
that.
is there. But
But I will tell you, it was a very cool experience, not just doing the research of it, but the fact that I had descendants come in. And then when we were doing the exhibit, because we did an exhibit for the 150th, and I was able to get that letter.
is it in the collection now?
No, but I was able to get it for the exhibit. And I got permission from the family to be able to use it and for other people to be able to use it in publications and stuff. I said, listen, if we're going to have this, people are going to be interested. Can they use it in research? Can they do that? And they were like, yeah, fine. So I know it's been used a good deal.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
In research. Yeah, which is great. So we had the letter on display. We had Bloss's sword on display, and then Mitchell's letters on display, along with the orders itself. We still have people come in every day. Do you have the orders?
Yeah.
No.
Almost once a
It's been
week.
since 2012.
Also,
Or no, 2014. I don't even know when the hell that was.
so why are you so obsessed with the orders?
Why? I have no idea, but I feel like I'm going to go to my grave telling people it was 2 cigars, not 3.
Everybody is obsessed with these orders, and they're all obsessed for the wrong reasons. What it isn't, how it was found.
Yeah.
Interesting conversation. So by the time you're hearing this episode, guys, it's July. Happy July. Happy Independence Day. I hope your summer's going well. But by the time we're recording this, it's earlier in the spring. And we just went through the disastrous end of Civil War Times Magazine, American Civil War, and things like that. Last night, I sat in and listened to a conversation with a bunch of people, Dana and Melissa, formerly of that organization, and others, talking about that whole experience, Gary Gallagher. And one of the threads was how lay people come to these stories, how the average person will engage with these stories. And I brought up the Wikipedia because Barton Mitchell's name is there. So like, blah, 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 whatever. So the same kind of thing, attaching it to 191, it's like a lot of that record has been corrected in these lay places, and yet persistence. It was a battle plan. 3 cigars, orders directly wrapped and twined around him. And then, we changed the McClellan quote 1,000 different ways. And but it's just, we've been able to correct so much of this through these opportunistic, I don't know what that maybe that's the right word, but like when the descendants come in with the letters, like how fortuitous is that? Like, were you sitting there like, shut your face?
It was just so crazy that it happened at the same time. We were
twice.
literally doing that. Well, and then we end up having like this family reunion of sorts because like the Mitchell family came to like panel discussions and we had a ceremony that they were there for. And the Bloss family came from from Florida, from Chicago, from like some of them had never met each other, and they were like came together. It was incredible. It really was, and it was really cool to like be able to bring all those people together, to bring like the Mitchell family together and the Bloss family together, and
so real quick for our
that.
listeners, in case you're lost on what Special Orders number 191 is, real crash course. The Confederate invasion of the North that happens in 1862 begins in September, real early September. They move across the Potomac River and into Frederick County and the surrounding areas, and basically where the 1864 fight is, the majority of the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia plops down for a camp. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am, but the actual suspected location of where this was found is not on modern park property. Because where the marker is more where Lee's headquarters was. Correct. And where it was found is not in that same spot.
Yeah, we put on the map like a mile radius between the visitor center and a mile north of there. I tend to think it's closer to some area around Grove Road.
Okay.
But the caveat here is that I did that research, between, starting in like maybe 2010 and forward, but I haven't had a lot of opportunity to do research on it, current research, and there has been a lot of current research on it.
Is that because you have park rangers? You got to just make sure they do their jobs because they are
I got to herd the cats. I got to herd the cats.
You're like, it's like children.
I don't have time to read anymore.
Tell me about it. I try to do this show, and it's like herding children and children cats.
Oh, really?
Like children cats. No, it's
yeah. No. That's what happens when you start to manage. You don't have time to do all the real fun stuff anymore.
I hear that.
That I will believe.
Not in the current profession I do. Thankfully, I get to play and do all the fun stuff still. But in my old life, let me tell you, once you go into the up the ladder a bit, the fun stops, and you gotta do a lot of paperwork.
Tracy's also being very humble because not only was she able to utilize and publish these resources for the first time, but as she implied, it has gone on and lived on. The extensive research that's been done in just the past few years on 191 is in large part due to her research as the basis, and then people have built off of that.
Boss.
Dr. Rosino has had 2 books now on 191, one from the federal perspective, one from the Confederate. He and our site do not quite agree as to where it was found.
What are the opposing perspectives? The Federals are like, oh, yes, and the Confederates are like, oh, nuts.
Pretty much.
All right, cool. That sums that up.
They're excellently researched.
By Tracy.
We don't entirely agree with his interpretation on where he believes it was found, but it's not far off the mark from where Tracy's original work suggested it would be either. So,
well, that's the fun of this, is looking at everybody's work and kind of narrowing it into a tighter place. So to finish what 191 is, the Confederate Army gets to Frederick, realizes that they're going to move in certain directions. They have federal presence and U.S. troops in places that they wouldn't like to have them in, so they make the decision to split the army up a bit. They write a whole bunch of orders of placing troops in certain places, and that's where the interpretation of battle plan comes in, because it's not a battle plan. It's a troop movement. It's like, Jackson, you're taking these troops. Your objective is to go here. Longstreet and the rest of us are going to go plop down near Boonsboro, and it's basically here's where we're going, not attack this, do that, not break this up. It's just kind of like, you go there, we'll go here. But that order, a copy of it intended for DHL, is dropped. We don't know how it happens, but whatever, and that's where Barton Mitchell comes into the story and picks it up, whether he can read it or not, irrelevant. He knew what it was enough to pass it along to somebody who passed it along, and it got into McClellan's hands, and we can debate its impact on the campaign. It's huge. It's not, but I say for a different day, go back and listen to our Maryland campaign episode. When we come back to the Maryland campaign with Scott Hartwig in September this year, there's a lot of credit McClellan deserves for that campaign that doesn't solely rely on the fact that he got this order.
Right.
Again, not a McClellan apologist, but on this campaign, I will fight you.
We will fight you.
Yeah, we will fight you. McClellan is a little bit better than we give him the credit. But so in the 62 year at this battlefield, you have it's not an open field, right? Like, it's not just the Army shows up and there's nobody there. I mean, there's families, there's farms. The history of one of those farms goes back much further than just the 1860s Civil War story. It's kind of got one of the more dubious Frederick County stories, one that you guys do a great job of highlighting and talking about. Obviously, I'm talking about the Vincentier family, their plantation La Hermitage that was founded in the late 18th century. I say dubious because I do believe it is the largest population of enslaved people, second largest in Maryland or in Frederick County?
Frederick County.
There's actually a place in Frederick County that had more going on. Where is that?
Needlewood Plantation.
All right.
It's over by Burkittsville.
No.
Needwood, I think. I butchered the name there, but
one of the largest questions there is why.
Right.
Because it's not that large of a production that's going on there that would,
that necessitate that amount of labor.
That amount of labor. Yeah.
Well, I want to do a whole episode on the pre-Civil War Monocacy site. In fact, the reason for that is Inside Baseball. Matt and I have been working on our next site-to-site collaboration idea, and I realized that our two sites have much more in common than just us needing to may or may not borrow your cannon.
Oh my! But, every year now.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to get asked. But no, I realize, like, where I work in the French and Indian War era, I'm out on the frontier, but where you guys exist in the 1860s story, in that same French and Indian War era is kind of this departure of people moving into different places of the frontier. And so very likely people from our story moved directly over roads and through land that you guys currently interpret a little bit later in the timeline. So look out, maybe not in 2024, but maybe in 2025, some 18th century stuff maybe happening at some top secret site. I don't know. We haven't got any approvals yet. We're spitballing here, but it illustrates that these stories are all much bigger. So when that ANV army gets to there in 1862, the Vincentiers have been out of that place and more or less out of town and either dead outright. But you got tenant farmers, you got the Thomas Farm, Worthington Farm that become major parts of the battle in 64 are operating there. And then you got the mill just across the river there. So what is the civilian situation when the Army comes in 1862? Like, we know that Lee picks the worst place in Maryland to invade if you're looking for support. Right. Obviously, an army that big cannot move kind of surreptitiously. So what's happening on those specific tracts of land where the people in 64 are, in 62? Are they getting out of town? Are they sympathetic to the army coming?
So the families themselves, at the battlefield, no, they stay put. In 62, I don't think they're not like hiding or anything because there's not like active fighting happening, but they certainly are. Having their fields trampled, their supplies taken, things like that. Not purposefully, but they're living off the land.
I guess I'm also asking because we know there's evidence of people like taking horses into the mountains and hiding other livestock and grain stores and things like. Is stuff like that happening at these homes? No,
that was in 64.
Okay.
In 62, we don't see any evidence of that.
Okay.
What we have evidence of in 62 is what's interesting is in the war reparations, when they could file a claim post-war, most of the farms they're actually filing for damages in 62 and not in 64.
Okay.
Now, probably that is because with those claims, it had to be Union soldiers who, and how would that work? Because they wanted unions, it had to be Union soldiers. But in 62, it's mostly Confederate.
Yeah,
so I'm not really sure.
In my brain, it's if the Union touched your property, we'll pay for it. If the Confederates did it, sucks to suck, buddy.
Right.
And they could argue the case for both, really, in 62. So I'm not sure why in 62, because you would think there would be more damage in 64. So it is sort of interesting. Well, why 62, not 64?
Exploring it real short here, I think that does make sense because there's more humanity there than there is in 64. I mean, you have almost the entire Army of the Potomac go through that region. Almost the entire Army of Northern Virginia sits right there. And whether they're shooting at each other or not,
for 3 days,
80,000 people in one stretch, 60, 50, 40 in another stretch, and they're all moving over crops. So there's your harvest seasons or whatever. And especially in the September month when they're there, it's right about to be harvest time. So
Yep.
Tremendous loss of crop probably on the bunch of those fields.
The fences, you know, some of the fences that have been rebuilt on the battlefield were taken straight from the war reparations. Those claims to know, you know, how high was that fence? You know, were they really that high, or were they trying to get extra money? But they never got what they lost.
Sure.
So can't really blame them for that. You know, the irony for some of this is, like with the Thomas family, they moved there in 1961. They're moving from Baltimore. They moved from Baltimore. He was, I think, ready to retire. He was a merchant in Baltimore, had been very successful. He's from Frederick County. And after the Baltimore riots, he wants to get his family back to safety. Back to safety. So he, you know, buys this really nice home in Frederick County and ends up having the war in his backyard multiple times through the Civil War.
Listen, nobody, though, is Wilmer McLean unlucky, though. I mean, like, that dude had it start in his yard, and then, like, he's the guy in town. When they come looking for anybody, it's like, Jesus, dude.
You know, the Thomas family was trying, but they didn't quite get there.
Yeah, they're pretty close.
I mean,
they host Grant. You know,
That's true.
Is that where Hunter gets the axe? Is it is it in that dude's house?
Well, we don't know that Hunter was in the house for that. He might have not even gotten a meeting at the house.
He was just fired walking in.
I think he showed up at the train and they were like, you're gone.
You're fired.
Yeah, you're fired.
That's one of my favorite stories. We don't have to cover it in depth, but I just like the quickness in which that happens. I've always imagined it. Like he doesn't even have his hat off walking in the door.
And then Sheridan comes on site, you know, with the rays of light coming from heaven, and you know he's brought into the home.
No,
and,
if Sheridan
you know.
was writing it would go down like that. Yeah.
No, it's okay. He's like, I will clear the valley. He's like, yes, you will. But no, I do love that, and I love that that's another random connection because I think most people are going to experience the 62 story, the 64 story, and they're going to experience them in these like different ways. Like the armies move through here in 62, and in 64 there's a fight here. But Grant is there. Mm-hmm. When is he there? Like right
August.
So 64. Not right when he comes east, but relatively soon.
I mean, it's a month after the battle, and that house sustained a great deal of damage. So there was work in progress on that house. I mean, he was seeing
some of the worst part of the. I mean, John Brown Gordon calls the third attack at the Thomas farm some of the worst fighting he sees in the entire war. But it's like, you think about that, it's like Grant sees the aftermath of that because he's at the house where Gordon mentions that. So, David Hunter, you got fired hardcore, buddy.
He did.
So one of our favorite stories is there, which I think sets the tone for both 62 and 64 of the families. Do you know what story I'm going to tell?
Oh, do it. Matt, get on the mic, man. Spit some hot fire.
I'm thinking, actually, I'm not sure which one you're going to reference.
Talked about
fire him.
Civilians. So when Grant is there's this famous story, or famous amongst us, anyhow.
Didn't know we were still talking about Grant. Yes, I know this story.
Virginia Thomas, she's about, 6 or 7, and she's sitting on Grant's lap. And he says to Virginia, he says, "What's your mama? Is she a rebel or is she a Yankee?" And she says, "Well, Mama, she's a rebel." And then he says, "Well, what's your daddy? Is he a rebel or is he a Yankee?" And she says, "Oh, well, Daddy, he's a Yankee when the Yankees come and a rebel when the rebels come."
Yeah, that's a guy's just
and that's really how all of them were.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
if they
folk.
stuck around, they had every army coming through every year. They dealt with whoever came through. Where do we think their sympathies may have been? Well,
the Thomases, it's hard to tell, but
Worthingtons, I think, were definitely sympathized with the Confederacy.
I mean, you see it. I mean, we had Kyle Dalton on from Union Mills Homestead, and he talked about the single family, the Shrivers, existing literally on opposite sides of the street, and that street divides them as the war divides them. It's like the Reb family on the one side, the Union family on the other side, and as both armies move through, they interact more or less standing on their principles, but you'll see some softening when the opposition is around because it's in your best interest not to poke the bear.
Well, yeah, and I mean we haven't seen anything specifically about the families, about really where their tendencies may have been. Now we know that the Worthingtons, the Thomas, and the Best all had enslaved people on those farms, and now with Glenn Worthington, you know, he grows up, he writes the book about the battle. He's a judge there in Frederick and all that. And it's very clear kind of from the book and particularly from a map that he commissions of what he would like the battlefield to look like.
Yeah.
That he's pretty much a Confederate at heart because it's a Confederate battlefield with a big Confederate monument.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. It didn't kind of work out that way if you read the rest of the story.
Yeah, it really didn't. But so the civilians who are there, they kind of deal with both.
What would you memorialize there? Here is this giant speed bump that caused us to fail in our objective.
Well, that's basically what the UDC monument says. It does not address the larger context of the campaign.
Yeah, not a shocker. Couldn't care less about the UDC. So I just wonder, when we explored the history of the memory of Gettysburg battlefield, it was interesting to me to learn that Gettysburg was established as a commemoration to the Union victory.
Right.
And that made a lot more sense to me in how that place developed over time. So I didn't really realize Glen Worthington envisioned this Confederate memorialized park. And it's like, what would you like? What is the victory that was gained? Like, you just ask in a sober sense. You won the fight. Yes, you sent the Yankees running, but campaign wise, that's where your objective was lost. Why memorialize that?
And Worthington knew that too.
Yeah, for sure. Again, UDC, but so anyway, I like to ask those questions because it's just what great. I had a great first round, but I got my ass knocked out 2 rounds later. But that first round, it's like nobody remembers that. What we remember is you lost. So
they were able to retell their story.
Great.
Yeah.
And so that's part of retelling their story.
That's true.
I heard. I'm going to go down a small rabbit hole here.
Okay.
I was at a conference recently, and I heard what probably won't be a real popular theory, but they were talking about, the monumentation and how, a lot of that was done probably not for the right reasons.
Yep.
And they actually lumped battlefields in with that, saying that, if you think about it, these battlefields were put there by the veterans, and those veterans movements typically did not include African Americans.
Right.
And so they weren't necessarily part of that conversation. But the monuments and the battlefields themselves were sort of all during this sort of Jim Crow period and established by Congresses who promoted that Jim Crow era.
Yeah.
And so that the battlefields were sort of monuments in themselves that were part of maybe a movement that should not have been.
We're going to do at some point when the time is right, a monumentation episode, because it's a fascinating subject no matter how you feel about it.
My master's degree is on.
Yeah, it's is it really?
Yeah, monumentation.
I don't think we've ever had that conversation. As many times as we talked about monumentation, have you directly ever told me that that's what your master's is in?
Probably.
Why are you keeping that card, buddy?
I knew that.
Yeah, okay. Well, obviously you know him better.
I knew that.
No, but it's a fascinating conversation. I think if we had a sober one nationally about it, we could make some progress with the Civil War conversation as a whole. But it's just fascinating to see what people focus on, don't, whatever, and the pick and choose. And it's kind of wild to me that, I guess because it happened in Glenn's front yard, it makes a little more sense.
It did. I mean, it made a huge impression on him, obviously. And veterans would come back and tell their stories. And then he was part of it. It wasn't just him, but he, was kind of the leader of this group. And I mean, they went before Congress, and he did research, and he wrote the first book on it. So
with all those families having enslaved individuals and knowing that as the A and B moved into Frederick County, there were, capturing and sending freedmen south.
Yeah,
was there any?
It's an interesting time.
Was there any grab of already you're enslaved at this property, but the army is still going to grab you anyway? Was there any of that? Did they?
There was a fear of that.
Okay.
When, particularly in the 64 campaign, I have heard, and these were just sort of stories handed down. I have no written sources about this.
Okay.
But what I had heard is that, yes, there were people who were free, and they had come to the Union lines, or they were going up towards Pennsylvania, they were getting out of Dodge, because they were very concerned. Even if the Confederates weren't interested, and I think in large part, I'm not sure how bothered they were by trying to capture
for the
people.
amount of booty and other things they're taking.
Oh, we're talking about booty now.
Stop. While
Turn
in
the lights
Maryland,
down, baby.
it is surprising that we don't have more examples of snatching people up, because we definitely do in 63. We absolutely do in 63 during the Gettysburg campaign. But why in 64? I suspect it's because Early is trying to move quickly.
Yeah. Well, and he's busy getting a bunch of other stuff. I mean, he's trying to get money. He's getting supplies.
He's
got
getting
animals.
Paid.
He's
Dude's
got
getting paid cash.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so that might be a conversation for a different day when more research is done as to who the bests are in the Worthingtons in relative to loyalty. We shouldn't speculate. No,
because we really don't know.
Right, but that's why you guys have the jobs you have, guys. You guys are legends.
Always
Get to
finding
work.
new things.
It's exciting. I do love when you have the opportunity to like ask a question and go, I don't know, and then now we have stuff to go do. I'll get the shovels. I'll get them.
It's an interesting time, though, in terms of all of that, particularly by the time we get to July of 64, because you have USCT now.
Right.
There's a USCT enlistment station at the Junction area, and you have, with the Emancipation Proclamation, all of that, but Maryland is not affected by that.
Right.
So a lot of people are really surprised when they come to the field to find out that there are enslaved people there, because they're like, wait a minute, isn't it 64? So you have this battle taking place in Maryland, in Frederick, where there are still people who are enslaved on those properties, but also a USCT station where people can enlist into the Army right there. So it's just
what a moment.
backwards.
And the very same summer that the third incursion is occurring, the state itself is having a constitutional convention,
right,
determining whether or not slavery will continue.
It's only a few short months later we pick up our second nickname in this state when we become the Freedom State, because I believe it's November 1st of 64.
Yep.
Right?
Very good.
So I listen, Matt. I've known you for a bunch of years now.
He's a true
I listen.
Marylander.
Yeah, Matt knows more about Maryland than I do, probably for being from the Mitten. But you just gotta respect.
I don't know about that.
But no, I definitely. I've always known the old line state, right? That's our state nickname. And I knew, I will give myself some credit. I did know about the November 1st, 64 new state constitution, but I didn't know that we adopted a new state nickname with that until I had basically heard that lesson directly from you. So if you wonder why we're the Freedom State, it's because of that.
Well, which is sort of ironic because it wasn't a whole lot longer. I mean, I don't know what the next date is, but it
67.
wasn't. Yeah, 67. So it's pretty quick that they do another constitution and then they start taking rights away.
Right. Hey, we're not perfect, right? We know crabs are good, and outside of that,
hey, I'm a Marylander through and through as well. So.
Yeah, and this is why we love what we do for a living, and that's why we do this show, and it will come back to this rabbit hole, but like the Civil War doesn't solve civil rights in this country.
No, it's messy.
Yeah,
I
mean,
it's very messy.
If you think it did, what world are you living in today in 2024? We're still dealing with civil rights in this country.
Right.
So
and I think that when I had mentioned, the whole idea of battlefield monumentation being, a product of Jim Crow and all of that, that's all as far as I can see what we do, that even if that was done, maybe not for the right reasons, we've changed that. And in the sense that people come there now and they are actually learning what really happened, and they're learning those stories, and they're learning about, Maryland actually freeing after they enslaved during that time.
We have this tough existence of being in sort of this transitional period where we're moving away from these older stories and assessing them against the actual records, not just the oratory that was passed down in your family. So we're in this weird crossover between like what happened and your emotional heritage, your familial heritage, because one of our guests basically put it down to, we are having these really rough conversations where we have to dance around the fact that like your grandparents were wrong, your parents were wrong.
Right.
And they might not have been maliciously,
right,
but it just is what it is.
Right.
In a humorous sense, I'm watching the TV show Modern Family right now, and there's an episode where they need the Cam and I forget his partner's name need to make some extra money for their wedding, and Cam's like, I've got this belt buckle that my granddad got from Wyatt Earp directly. Turns out obviously it's like a gas station novelty item, and then he's like, you know what, I always wondered those dates would never have lined up, talking about like life and death, but in his family, they were illustrating like this was a sentimental thing. It's this emotional connection to his grandfather, and it wasn't real. Obviously it's a TV show, but it highlights that's the spirit of this conversation when it comes to how we think about things. It's messy.
Yeah, they're hard conversations, and it's hard when you have people who, they're descendant of people who fought for the Confederacy, and their families were proud of that, but for different when I'm talk about the Civil War, and the way I put it is, people fight for reasons and governments fight for reasons.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it.
Unfortunately, no matter what the people were fighting for, they're fighting for a country who is fighting for something.
Right.
And oh God, will you get how many people have said, oh, well, but my family didn't own slaves. Well, they may not have owned slaves, but they were part of an economy and a political system that functioned because of the labor of enslaved. And every poor farmer in the South was beholden probably to a larger farmer who was helping them get their supplies to the market or whatever, or they were renting enslaved, or when they became more productive, they had enslaved of their own. Right. So they're part of the system. And I've had some interesting conversations lately where you break that down and you're like, okay, so even if they didn't necessarily go with all the tenets of what the Confederacy was about, if they're still fighting for that machine, does that make them an evil person?
Well, think about this
then you
today.
go back to World War II with the Nazis. And so if they're German soldiers and they're forced to fight, are they forced to fight, or do they still have a choice?
Right.
Yeah.
Plus, think about our modern military. How many people you very likely think swing one way politically, but serve under a administration that exists?
They join the army because what are their options?
Right. There's so many reasons. What is one of our big themes on this show is like, don't insult your ancestors by just calling them people of their time. Mm-hmm. Like by assuming because they didn't own a slave, like they just didn't know any better. It's like your ancestors were not dumb. The same way you're not dumb today by knowing your world, right and wrong, and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So it's like when they say things like in the very sensitive conversation about Lee's decision to leave the U.S. Army and move things, it's always this, well, he was a man of his time and did the state loyalty. And it's like, I think what you're really saying there without saying it is that guy's a moron, which he wasn't. And I don't think people really understand that. So on our show, we are pretty consistent with like, don't call your ancestors stupid by trying to take those low roads out. They were complex people like we are. They think like we do. And I mean, even if you're a hee-haw from the sticks that can't read, you were taught your Bible or something else that basically explained rights and wrongs. And we didn't, maybe we all were actually that dumb. And that's why we are dealing with what we're dealing with today in this world.
I think it's an uncomfortable conversation. And I think folks get a little frustrated about, why are we talking about it so much? Why is that always the conversation now? But it's because it's finally become part of the conversation.
Well, the sins of our father. We haven't talked about it for so long.
We did not talk about it before. They were completely excluded from the history of a war that was completely about them.
Right.
Which is just crazy. So, yeah. And we're going to keep talking about it.
And we should.
If you come to Monocacy National Battlefield, I'm not going to say every person that walks in there today would know that, unless we're talking about the Hermitage or they ask us specific questions. But when they come into the new museum, they're going to see it.
This is that's the transition I'm talking about, is like there's these people who don't want to know the rest of the story, know it, don't care. But there's this moment where it's like people are doing this great research and being immediately invalidated because granddaddy said or grandmama said. And it's like, and it's just like this conversational endurance that almost everybody doing legitimate research has to have. And it can be in fun ways, like where we make McClellan not to be a total douchebag in 62.
But it's fun.
Right. Or it can be in tough ways where we have to have very sober conversations about why these people fought. I mean, Scott Harwig, one of the best people in the Civil War community that we've all had the chance to learn from and observe and things like that. told us that when he would do Pickett's charge walks, and again, it's Longstreet's assault, but for you guys out there that don't want to get hip,
he agrees with you, though.
I know. That was my favorite. Up until having Tracy on our show, this was my favorite moment where Scott Harwig told me that he would go with my lead on that.
And he has since used it.
And he hasn't, he's kind of kept going.
Wow.
So you're welcome, Scott. But he said that they would go across the field and they would get to about halfway, and he would stop everyone and go, why are these guys here? Like, why is everybody here doing this? Mm-hmm. And he would just wait for somebody to start answering the question. And it opened a conversation. And he said, which was great because if you do your job as a ranger well, you don't be antagonistic with your question. And you can get somewhere by not being antagonistic. But I think most people don't stop and have that moment. Like, why is this happening? Mm-hmm. And I think that's great that more sites, more museums, more writers, individuals are moving into those existential questions. I remember when Gettysburg's new visitor center opened, people had a lot of blowback against that because they grew up in that 60s, post-60s era.
We still hear about it.
But you know what? The moment I say to somebody, because whenever I hear this in my world, I say, what if you're from another country and you come to the United States and you're going to get one Civil War story? Where are you going? Mm-hmm. You're going to go to Gettysburg. So they're now realizing that they have an opportunity to tell the rest of the story than just that 63 story. Mm-hmm. And other sites are realizing we can do more than just pigeonhole these little things into this bigger moment. And Antietam just did a great job of opening up more conversations about this. You guys are going to allegedly do this at your top secret site again. The agents are at the door. We've said too much. But what is important about it is you guys keep doing the work. So shout out to you guys both, all your peers, everybody that's doing this kind of work right now. Because even if it's not your personal favorite thing to do, because I imagine there's people doing this work right now that are like, when they find out some of their own family histories maybe are wrong.
I wish everybody would get a DNA test.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some fun conversations.
Yeah.
I love it.
But it's needed. And you said, like, why now so much? Not that you were asking, but like people's frustration. It's that theme. It's the sins of the father. It's like, you guys we don't deal with this. So who was the president that said the buck stops here?
Roosevelt?
Truman.
Was it Truman? It was one of those two. But
Go with Matt.
Yeah, I'm going to right now. Mainly because he said it confidently and you were like, question? But at that point, in society right now, I guess we're choosing the buck to kind of stop here a little bit. And we're forcing it more. Now it's ugly, it's painful, but it reminds me of just doing what you need to do, which, to bring it back into our conversation here, is kind of the position Lew Wallace is going to be in 1864. You just kind of do what you got to do to get the work done, whether you succeed or fail in the moment.
Or you get court-martialed or
whatever.
Sure.
So like in the existential conversation we were just having, like, we got to do what we got to do right now, no matter how it shakes out individually. We're fighting, writing, researching for a much greater good. So getting back to blood and guts and bullets, in 62, we have troops moving through. This is all on the pathway to what will be Antietam. But in 64, it's a very different story. These aren't massive armies that are moving through here. So what is the situation real quick in 63 before we jump to 64? Because armies move through there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is how much of a Confederate presence goes through there? How much of a federal presence, U.S. presence, goes through there in 63?
It's not nearly as much as in 62.
Right.
63, somebody does use Thomas, I think, spends the night there. Isn't there? Who is it?
Hancock. So
I defer to Matt.
He's superb.
The Federal Second Corps and several Union Corps pass up the Georgetown Pike into Frederick before moving north to Pennsylvania.
Through here. I mean, literally where we're broadcasting from is where the 2nd and part of the 6th Corps go through.
Right. We also have to remember in 63, Monocacy Junction has an important role to play with the change of command, because that is where the orders from the War Department are going to come to.
Through the wire?
To physically. They send a colonel from the War Department with the order giving command of the Army of the Potomac to Meade. And he comes physically to Monocacy Junction, gets off there, rides over to the Arcadia Mansion, where Meade's 5th Corps is camped. That's where he gives him the order saying, hey, you're in charge.
So there's 2 mansions in my brain,
Correct.
and they both exist. There's one where he physically takes command, and there's one where he is when he knows you need to get over to this place.
So Arcadia is where he's physically at, and he receives the order there, and then he rides over to Hooker's headquarters.
Near Fort Operating Base borders.
Right, exactly. It's over by my place. And that will be where Hooker formally relinquishes command, and then there's a formal happening that occurs at the United States Hotel down on
Patrick Street.
Patrick and All Saints.
Right. Yeah. But okay, so I just wanted to make sure, because there's both those structures relative to Meade are still in existence. I think one is either a church or private residence, and the other one's a currently vacant mansion.
Correct. In both cases.
I was correct in both cases for once? Can you write? Did you witness that, Tracy?
Arcadia Mansion was briefly a church. They're trying to make it into a B&B, from what I understand, in a venue.
I mean, it's a beautiful property.
It is. And then it's not Winchester Hall. I'm trying to think of the name of the hall. But regardless, where Hooker's at was the Catholic school.
Oh, okay.
A Catholic boys' school, and has since become they're trying to sell it as a private residence.
I mean, it's a beautiful estate. It's kind of out of place with all the modern construction behind it, but man, they got a nice chunk of grass around it to kind of keep it looking nice.
Right.
You should buy it, guys.
Okay.
Just pony up that dough, that lucrative Ranger dough that y'all get.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you asked that, Pat, about 63 and the movements, because it's the Army of the Potomac that's moving through the area of Monocacy Junction and Frederick in 63. There is a brief Confederate cavalry raid that moves into Frederick, and they scare the bejesus out of the town. There's a couple of Federal troops captured, and I think they might burn a newspaper in 63. They do it in 62. I think they do it in 63 as well. And then Cole's cavalry comes in and drives them right the heck back out.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do this. Let's get to 64, because I want to explore this story a little bit. The situation has dramatically shifted in the American Civil War. We have gone overland. We are not doing this big campaign in the sense that we're moving all over the chessboard. I think at this point Grant's come east, and he's really starting to put the boot down, put the foot down. I guess my personal analogy is this is where he hits the gas. We go overland, and it causes Lee to start doing a series of tactical retreats and decision-making that's going to force this conversation into what will become the beginning of the end of the war. So because my brain can't remember, what is the month where Lee basically turns to Jubal Early and is like, make this run into the valley, clear it out, and then if you get to the bottom of it, again, upside down. The Appalachian people are weird. The bottom of the valley is the top of the valley.
It's the river.
It's the way it flows?
Yeah. The way the river
Shenandoah
flows.
Does it go
north.
upside down?
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
I'd
Like
never
the
read it.
Nile.
Is it as historically relevant as the Nile is,
No.
though? Everybody in Appalachia just turned off. They're like, you can't crap on my river. You crap on my river.
I love me some Egyptian history as well.
Oh, you know what? That's what you come back for. You talk pyramids, let's go. But so we get to this moment, right, or I always simplify this conversation to this is where the Confederate Army is starting to begin its desperation. It's realizing it's got this massive weight pressing down on it. Its options are becoming very limited. They have to make decisions that either allow for Grant to make direct run on Richmond or eat up a lot of their own troops in engaging and sustaining casualties. So I always say a desperate fighter is a dangerous fighter. It's not a saying I invented, but it's something I say in this interpretation a lot. And this is where Lee will turn and create a very dangerous situation for the United States. Jubal Early will get into the valley. He'll engage with David Hunter. When does that all begin?
In June.
It is.
Okay, so it's like right before so a lot happens in a very short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because this is the same campaign that starts with battles like Lynchburg and Newmarket, correct?
Mm-hmm. Newmarket's earlier in the year. That's in May, and that's the first time Federal forces attempt to come into the valley.
It's like a month before June.
And Sigel gets knocked at Newmarket, and then David Hunter takes over. He begins a second campaign, crushes what little Confederate resistance there is at Piedmont.
Is that Breckinridge at Piedmont again?
No.
Okay.
Breckinridge is out. He's moved into the defenses of Richmond and has to run back because of what's going on.
Oh, so after Newmarket, he is back in Richmond after that.
Right.
Okay.
He's pulled back to the defenses of Richmond and whatnot. Then Hunter comes in, whoops up on Allegheny Johnson, at Piedmont, kills him, and then moves on towards Lynchburg, and Breckinridge moves into Lynchburg.
Piedmont is modern-day Delaplane, Virginia, I believe, correct?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
I think that's correct. But so we move. I like how you said earlier in the year. It's 1 month before Tracy said June. May is. Have I had the calendar wrong my whole life?
No, but it's a very different series of movements.
Okay,
that's why.
All right. So it's June when this really directly starts to become the Monocacy story. Then.
Yeah.
All right. So what's the situation then? Like Early has been dispatched into the valley. Is his objective just very simply stated, get the Federals out of where the food's coming from?
Initially, he's sent there to get Hunter out.
Directly for Hunter.
Yes,
Just get him out of there.
directly to get Hunter out. There had been a conversation prior to his going into the valley where basically he and Lee were talked, and Lee said to him, basically, let's see how it goes. And you make the decision when you're there. If you feel comfortable and you think you're going to be able to get into Maryland, give it a shot. If you don't think it's going to happen, get back here.
Right.
Because they know that Grant has taken the forces out of Washington, and they're in Northern Virginia now.
So is that conversation get into Maryland, or if you get near Maryland and you think you can run on Washington?
Yes.
It's that conversation.
It's that conversation. Because it's a lot. Do they think they're going to take over the Capitol and, game over? No. But it's really important at that point politically, because it's an election year.
Right.
And if you can threaten the Capitol, they're hoping it will, force Lincoln at that point. I think a lot of people were surprised by this. In early summer of 1864, Lincoln didn't think he was going to be reelected. There was nothing sure about that.
Right. A lot of people are banking on the war Democrat McClellan getting in and suing for peace, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
And that is interesting because, and that's another conversation for another day, but McClellan himself is a war Democrat and is publicly saying he wants to prosecute the war.
I love that we will forever get to do this show because we were like, nope, not going to do that rabbit hole today. And we just write it down. We'll come back to that one.
Right.
Yeah. And it's really important because Lincoln, he's quoted as saying he thinks that, if McClellan wins, he's going to have to, which I don't think this would ever work, but that he would have to work with him in a sense to try to, make peace. I don't know that McClellan would actually take any advice from Lincoln, but that's another rabbit hole.
That's another rabbit hole. One we've explored a bit, but not enough.
The Lincoln-McClellan relationship.
I love it. Now we will get into it.
Okay.
So I guess what you're alluding to is they're aware that they're not going to be able to occupy the city, but maybe they're not aware of this direct relation, but for us, several centuries later, in one context, the British, when they capture Washington in 1814, have no intention of holding the city for a long time. Mm-hmm. They're there to do some damage, make a statement. Luckily for us, a big, more or less hurricane helps us out. Yeah. But
well, it gave us a pretty White House.
Yes, it did.
White House.
It did.
Yeah.
But the point there is it's more or less a similar kind of context. Get in there, be a shock, create an effect. Mm-hmm. At this time, the effect is affect election season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, affect election season. And also by forcing Grant or if they can force Grant to move soldiers back into D.C.,
then Lee gets
it's going to relieve pressure off of Lee. So there's a couple different things that are in play. It's threaten, even if you can't get in, if you can at least threaten them and force Grant to move these soldiers back in and show the people in the North who are sick of this war that the South is still a viable enemy. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that they want to prove here with this. And so that's going to be part of the movement. There's also some little side story of a bunch of prisoners at Point Lookout who they're going to,
spring out.
Yeah, they're going to spring out. But that dies out pretty quickly. I think they know that's not going to
So
happen.
in this moment, are they aware that this is about to be a Hail Mary, or do they have confidence that these multiple objectives can work? Not in a desperation sense.
I think it's a good question. I think that Early must have had some confidence, thinking that the way was fairly clear for him, and that he wasn't going to meet a terrible much of a resistance coming through. And I think that the battle at Monocacy is kind of a shock for him.
Well,
He
yeah,
is not expecting that at all.
well, his first, I would say when we get to the story in a minute, the first little deployment of troops validates that because he doesn't commit to the fight, and he's like, I got to keep sending people in. Then suddenly he's like Harry Heath, I got my whole damn army in this
I will say when I'm talking to people about it, I often say to them, like, think about Early and what he must be thinking while he's like trying to just like bleed money out of Frederick. That's what he's worried about, getting his ransom, but yet keeps getting all of this information from the battlefield about it ain't going well.
You got to send in more of your guys.
Like, what? I got to send a whole other division in?
All right, so myth bust, and then let's get into money really quick. How many guys does Jubal Early have when he crosses into Maryland? When this directly becomes, we are now threatening Middletown, when we have troops up in Pennsylvania and Chambersburg, like how many guys? Because we've heard 18,000, 15,000. Matt, every time I bring up 12 to 15,000, Matt's like maybe 12,000. Matt, like, and it's such a deadpan. He's like so annoyed at me every time I do it.
It really depends on what you read.
Right, and that's really been the problem all along. We've had some really good research in the past couple of years on this campaign. Ryan Quint's book, he doesn't believe it's 15,000. 15,000 is the number that's classically used for Early's force.
Okay.
The Army of the Valley District, as he calls it, which is 2 very small corps. It is probably closer to 12.
North or south of that number? All right, yeah, that's fair. But I mean, what's their opposition though? So they move into Maryland, and do they know that Lew Wallace is there? Like, what is in their mind? What is the big federal speed bump for them? Where is it, and how many troops? They
know that Lew Wallace is there. They know that he's got 100 day men.
Right.
And they think that's all they're facing.
All right.
Yeah. They don't necessarily know it's Wallace.
Because I know that Harper's Ferry...
they know that there's a federal force there and that it's basically 100 day men.
Because I know Harper's Ferry tries to edge into this conversation that they're really the battle that saved Washington. Losers.
Fort Stevens, Monocacy, Harper's Ferry. I mean, it's all part of it. It's all part of the story. But Monocacy is really the most important and crucial element of that story.
That's where the
without that,
dude, that's where the initiative is outright lost.
They are walking into Washington.
I will give Harper's Ferry the credit that Jubal Early kind of skirts around it because of the presence that's there. So that is a major effect on how things play out.
Definitely.
But I mean, you didn't do much other than just be there. Lew Wallace fought. So.
There's some pretty good skirmishing that occurs around Harper's Ferry and some pretty significant artillery fire coming off of Maryland Heights the next day. So Early's forces do skirt Harper's Ferry. Early would state in his remembrances of the war, whatever he refers to it as, that he would have loved to have captured Harper's Ferry, as his predecessor had done.
Oh.
He's referencing Jackson.
Jackson, yeah.
But he doesn't feel he has time to fight through those defenses.
Is the old Stonewall Brigade in this campaign?
Yep.
Okay, there's not much of them left at this point.
They are under Folk, I think. They're attached to Terry's Virginians because they're so darn small.
Well, I was going to say, this is the era of consolidated Confederate units left and right.
Right.
I mean, you guys have multiple Confederate consolidated units on the field there. Let's talk ransoms, because that's one of my favorite lead-ups to this. Matt, when does Chambersburg happen before he crosses into Maryland, or is that a simultaneous?
Later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yep. So that's after
July 30th.
Oh, that's on the retreat. That's
no, it's not even the retreat. It's a completely separate.
After.
All right.
End of the month.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thanks. Battle of the Crater.
Is it?
Yep.
Burning of Chambersburg.
Yep.
Dude, you're just blowing up huge, Tracy. Goddamn. All right. So forget Chambersburg right now. What is irrelevant? So when does Jubal Early make it into Maryland, and what is his first target as far as and why? And when does he figure out that ransoming is going to be part of this sort of MO on this campaign?
I have heard of the ransoms in different areas to a small degree. Like I had even heard that he had tried to ransom Hancock.
Definitely tries to ransom York in 63.
Yeah. Wait, like Hancock, Maryland?
Yeah.
And no wonder did they pay for it?
No.
I wouldn't pay for it now.
There's nobody there.
We got like 2 listeners in Hancock, and I appreciate you, but you know where you live. You know where you live.
I mean, most of my family is from Hancock, and Yeah, no. And I think they basically said that. They're like, there's hardly anybody
Like, you're really
here.
cool, but I don't take back what I said. Hancock and Dundalk, you guys know who you are.
Yeah. So, there's another rabbit hole for you. Hancock during the Civil War, because it's actually very interesting. They had there was a big Union presence there.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
interpret that at our site because it's
Yeah.
directly relative to our,
Yeah.
because we're an 1861 story. So when Jackson moves through there in the winter of 61, early 62, I mean, that's when I get to talk about the Civil War at my job. I mean,
and there's
that is what I
essentially
get
like
to
a
do.
bit of a blockade there at some point where they can't get supplies. And if you go through the cemeteries up there, tons of children
Yes.
that died during that period.
Yeah. I
That's
don't want to
bad.
focus on that because that will bum me out.
Yeah,
That's a rabbit hole I don't want to go in.
It's a
But
whole different rabbit hole.
here's what I like about that story, not the dead kids part, but the cannons.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Welcome to the show, Tracy. The cannon, the reason that we did our official collaboration, the Parrott rifles that come to Fort Frederick and open up where my fortification is are literally coming from Hancock as part of the repulsing of Jackson's force there. So
my family may or may not have found lots of bullets from that period.
yeah, every Appalachian person up there is just sitting on all these cool relics.
You
I'm not
got
surprised
it.
to hear that from your family
Yeah,
either.
projection.
Can I have one?
Yeah.
Can I just have one? No, I'm just kidding. I don't want a relic.
I'll show you the collection sometime.
Sick. All right, so I already missed the answer. When do they move into Maryland?
So they're going to cross over, skirting Harper's Ferry. Early's forces cross over the Potomac River on the night of July 5th into the 6th of 1864.
Oh, this is going to go quick.
Yes.
Okay.
And part of the reason why it goes quick is because how Early decides to gobble up and ransom the first town. He's going to use his cavalry to do it.
What's the first town?
Hagerstown,
Hagerstown. How much do they pay for Hagerstown?
$20,000.
And isn't Hagerstown a Confederate supporting town? So no?
No.
Is that just today? That's probably just today.
It is today. Western Maryland is very different today. They forget.
Oh, it's a whole
They
different
kind of
country.
forget.
It's the beginning of Pennsylvania right there, honestly.
Yeah, they kind of forget.
All right, so how much do they ransom Hagerstown for?
$20,000.
20,000. So 5 digits in that number.
Right.
They pay it in full?
Yes, and it's actually a combination of banks and some citizens.
Oh, just people ponying up the private dough.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to say, we put together an exhibit on the ransoms, and we had artifacts from Hagerstown, Middletown, Frederick, and Chambersburg. And I'm born and raised in Hagerstown, and
How did you get so cool, Tracy? Like, how? Like, I am the man who craps on towns all over the country here, apparently. But, like, you know who you are, Hagerstown, but you're so cool. Like, how did...
Hagerstown's not all that bad.
Good job to your parents.
Yeah, well...
Well, Jonathan Street's terrible, and I think that's what people think. All of it. Is that where you're from,
God,
too?
don't say that.
Is that directly where you're from?
No, that's like a heritage area now.
Is it?
Yes.
Have you been there?
I drive down that street quite often.
When I lived in Hagerstown, that is where the police spent like 90% of their time.
Yeah. It unfortunately is not always the best area of town. But they have some really cool resources there, actually. The Dolman Museum, they're trying to set up the Dolman Museum there. It's a collection of African-American artifacts from the Dolman family. And they've been doing, much like Arch in Frederick, sort of the same kind of organization.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that works out because the only association I have with Jonathan Street is bars, and don't go there at night. Like, don't do it.
I know. I grew up there and had that too, but I have a little bit more appreciation, I think, of the area now because I've learned a little bit more about the history of it.
Well, I look forward to that because that's what I should focus on and not the horrible things I have experienced there personally.
I understand. Having grown up there, I totally understand.
Well, see, that's what I like. It's like I would like to change that because the place is beautiful. The human experience isn't always beautiful, but the place is pretty.
Yeah. More importantly, oh crap, I can't think.
And a lot of those structures are like germane to these eras. Like a lot of them are still originals.
Oh, there's some. Yeah, there's a house that they were trying to save, like part of the original part. That's, I don't know, I guess 19th century, but it goes way back. That they've been working on trying to save, I think.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that, and I will. I won't retract what I said, but I look forward to evolving.
There you go.
On how I feel, because honestly, what I feel about it right now is what you kind of just heard. But all right, so $20,000 for Hagerstown. May or may not have overpaid for that in any century. Where do they go on from Hagerstown?
First of all, let me just say this about Hagerstown. Poor Hagerstown, because what I learned is, man, they got hit all the time when the Confederates were coming through there. And, they got hit over and over and over.
Are they coming there for the trains, or is it just because it's a big enough town with supplies
They're
they can
coming
grab?
for supplies.
Okay.
I mean, they're hitting those stores
But
over and over and over again. Because you have to remember, at the time, Hagerstown was a big town. It was just as big as Frederick.
No, right.
That's
like in seriousness mode, without me taking shots. Like that's what I'm getting at is like, it's called Hub City because it's known as a railroad junction. It's you have the ability to literally turn tracks and things like there's one or two roundhouses there type of thing. So so when they're coming through there all the time, is it for the infrastructure or the resource?
The resources.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
And that's a good point that Tracy made, because not only do they get hit that day by McCausland's cavalry brigade, and they get their $20,000 and some bolt cloth and things like that, but just a few hours later, I think it's McNeil's Rangers roll into town.
You said bolt cloth?
Bolt.
Did they get any gold braid?
I do not believe they got any gold braid.
It's going to make cheesy reference, sorry. So wait, they get hit twice by the same army?
No, that's the thing. These Raiders, I think it is McNeil's Rangers, they're following in the wake of Early, but they're not attached to him. So they ride into Hagerstown being like, we're going to take stuff.
Hagerstown's like, it's gone.
We're out of money.
They get like 10 pairs of boots.
Out.
I thought you were about to say they get like $10.
Yeah,
like,
no, they get like 10 pairs of boots. That's the extent of it. Because they're like, we want this. And they're like, your whole...
it's gone.
Yeah.
You're a little late to the game.
Dude, that's embarrassing for
Party's
McNeil.
over.
That's funny.
I'm pretty sure it's McNeil's Rangers.
All right, so then they move very quickly. They go directly to Middletown?
Mm-hmm.
How much
the
they
infantry is already moving that way.
Yeah.
All right, so how much does Middletown get ransom for?
Is it $1,500? But they don't get all of that.
They demand $5,000.
They demand
$5,000.
$5,000. Okay.
Wait, is there no consistency with the why did they ask for $20,000 and then $5,000?
Well, Middletown's tiny.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's really tiny.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah. So interesting thing about that I found out while I was doing this work is I found out the I think their interior decorating place. I could have that wrong, but it was a store in Middletown. And when they removed a wall is when they found the safe.
Mm.
And that was the safe that the money was stored in.
Oh, like the safe?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was built into a wall, and it was really cool. And I got to take the key and open it up and all that.
It's one of those
stuff.
intricate where it's got multiple switches, right?
Yeah.
Old school.
Yeah, it was really cool. We just had a picture of it in the exhibit.
We just had a devastating fire in Frederick County over an antique row, I believe on Carroll Street or whatever. But inside that antique store is one of those really cool, like you're talking about, bank-style vaults that has the multiple mechanisms and all that. So, man, everything was so cool, like back in those days with the technology. Now it's like, touch your plastic card, did this thing. That's so boring.
But they had, so for their commemoration, I mean, it's just like a regular store. Like I said, I think that they're interior decorators or something. But they allowed people to come in and look, here's the safe.
That's awesome.
That's
and they opened it up and had, what looked like old time money and stuff in it,
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
though.
I mean, they were very nice about it and proud, that was part of the history.
Now, Middletown's not a
town.
stranger to the war in 64. In 62, they have inherited a ton of dead and wounded from the Antietam campaign. Future president convalesces there in town. I believe that structure is still in existence.
It is.
How much of the 62 hangover is still affecting that town in 64? If it is so small, and it did have such a big impact from the 62 campaign, when Jubal Early's guys get there in 64, even though no battle was fought there, is the town just worn out? Like why 1,500 and not 5,000? Are they just that small that this is all we have?
And
That's
I
all
wonder
they
if they were trying to wait them out a little bit too.
It's certainly possible.
Because I think they moved on.
Oh, you think the Middletown guys were like, oh,
well, because they came up with so much money, and then the McCausland's guys, and they had to move on.
Okay.
They couldn't wait around for the rest of it.
All right, so then from there, into Fredericktown.
Right.
Into Frederick.
All right.
And Early talks about wanting to wait around to allow the Middletown folks to bring in the rest of the funds, and he's looking to wait around until the morning of July 9th. But fighting has already broken out west of Frederick on the east side of Middletown, and then the Catoctin Mountains on the west side of Frederick on the 7th and 8th of July, which forces him to move on.
Because that's where we get our fun little cavalry fight that used to be right in between where my old place and your place was. We used to, if you drove from my old place in Frederick to Matt's place, you had to drive right through the middle of this Rocky Springs cavalry fight, where everybody was dusty and didn't know what was happening for a minute. So moving into Fredericktown, are they physically hearing some of these pop-offs, or is they just getting reports of the cavalry engagement, small skirmish here, whatever?
Well, the citizens of Frederick could definitely hear
I mean,
the fighting
Jubal
going on.
Early, like, is Jubal hearing these things? Like, is where he's at, is he audibly aware of the situation, or is he just getting reports like, oh, damn,
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, probably initially getting the reports.
Right.
But
And the fighting on July 7th does start in the Middletown Valley. And so
and then moves towards?
And then moves
Okay.
eastward. So it's very possible he would have physically heard it, too.
I didn't bring it up yet, but is Harry Gilmore part of Jubal Early's force, or is that
He is.
He
Yep.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Is that story about to start, or is it already
Yes.
started?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before we get to Gilmore, moving into Fredericktown, this is where my brain goes. I'm looking for consistency, and maybe I'm looking for it in places where it doesn't exist, and I need to stop. But 20,000 from a town that we just said was more or less as big as Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
But Frederick's going to have an extra zero attached to that ransom?
Yeah.
Why? 200,000, by the way. It's like,
Right.
Why?
So there's a theory that I don't believe.
Is this the typo theory?
Yeah,
No.
the theory that there's a
Yeah.
typo and all of that.
It's been pretty well debunked.
Here's my theory that I sort of came up with as I was working on this exhibit is I think that they're pissed.
Yeah.
They're pissed about everything that they saw in the valley and the destruction that was caused, the burning of VMI, the former governor's home, the crops, everything.
John Letcher's home got torched?
Up.
Oh, I didn't know. That's awesome.
Yeah. Letcher's mansion gets torched.
Yeah.
Is that
And-
Wesley Merritt that does it, or is that Hunter?
It's part of Hunter's forces.
Okay, because I know Wesley Merritt's burning stuff up out there, too.
I almost feel like they just keep upping the ante.
Okay.
And by the time, and I always get this sense of frustration, like by the time they get to Chambersburg, like, what can we possibly do that they that they just can't match us?
Right.
Burn it.
And it's like, what was it, like $300,000 or $500,000? I can't remember exactly how much it was.
$500,000?
It was crazy amount of money.
It was $500,000 in federal
And
greenbacks
supplies.
or $100,000 in gold.
Yeah.
That was what they.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of felt like at that point they're just going like, what can we possibly say we know they can't come up with?
Right.
And they start burning before the time is up.
Right.
Okay.
Now, again, that is Chambersburg at the end of the month. But by the time, and Tracy's right, by the time they hit Frederick, they're looking at big numbers. They want to see how much they can squeeze out of these folks because Early does give Frederick an option.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 200,000 in federal greenbacks. And when I say greenbacks, folks, that is the paper money of the time because it's worth more than Confederate script by a lot.
I mean, Confederate script was worth nothing.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it wasn't gold.
Right.
There was no buried treasure anywhere.
Right. Or
Don't debunk my myth there,
Sorry.
Tracy. There's gold. There's Confederate gold out there.
There's no gold to
It's
find
hidden.
anywhere.
It's hidden in Texas in Palo Duro Canyon.
Jeez. Or he's requesting $50,000 in supplies for his 4 departments. So the administrative departments of the Army, his commissary, his medical, his ordnance, and whatever the last one is. It would equal $200,000 as well.
Okay.
But in supplies.
All right.
So they can either do the cash or they can do supplies.
Wow, your Midwest just flared out of your mouth there. What? What? So does Frederick debate what they're going to do? Did they go straight to we're going to pay this, or do they go maybe get a little of that, get some cash?
I think they went straight to figuring out how we're going to do this.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So
There's letters that go back and forth between Early and the town's, the mayor or whoever, they kind of go back and forth a little bit.
Where's Jacob Engelbrecht in all this?
He's writing in his diary.
He's
very
taking
busy.
notes.
He's very busy taking notes.
I mean, we're like almost 2 hours into this. His name hasn't come up yet. I'm like, I just realized like the biggest nosy person in history, which we're grateful for.
Yeah, thank God for Jacob
He'd have been a
Engelbrecht.
terrible neighbor, but like thank God he existed
No, I
from
would
our
not
perspective.
have wanted him as a neighbor.
I would have punched him in the face, to be very honest. Like that dude is,
Would
I'd
have
been like,
annoyed-
mind your business.
He would have annoyed me in real life, but
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for him now.
Yeah, I think most people like realize that it's like, man, this guy is such a strong resource for us, but I would have never liked this guy in real life. Like, mind your damn business, fool.
Well, I think one of my favorite sidebars to this story and this campaign kind of ties into that because first off, the road, which is today West Patrick, that Engelbrecht lives on, everybody flows right down that road
Right.
when they're moving eastward. So he's going to see everything.
Right.
But guess who else sees everything? The town of Frederick.
I was going to say the person who did not wave the flag.
Lew Wallace himself is complaining on July 8th of citizens in the streets watching the fighting going on west of town.
You're going to get hurt.
Or getting up on their roofs to watch the fighting west of town. We talk about this in 61 and how silly people were at First Bull Run, but the fact of the matter is this is still something that people wanted to see. They wanted to get the information on. And Wallace himself is complaining about
what's
it.
The Catholic Women's School? I can't think of the name of it.
The Visitation
Catholic Women's
Academy?
School.
Visitation Academy. And so we know, like, Visitation Academy, they were up on the roof.
Yep.
Watching.
Wow. I would not. I mean,
There's a lot of southern-leaning ladies at that school, too, interestingly enough.
Oh, yeah.
I would say that I don't want to see that, but I'm absolutely sure the macabre part of me would, because every time I see a car accident, I'm like, stop rubbernecking. And then I get there and I'm like, oh my God, do you see that? And I do it. It's the human.
You're not that far removed from, take a picnic and go watch a battle.
That's what I mean. But it's like that same macabre human trait that
Take a picnic, go to see the hanging.
you might not want to go out of your way to see it. But if it's happening in your backyard, you're like, maybe I'll take a peek. A lot of people regret it, especially at Manassas. They regretted it, especially when the U.S. troops went running right through their picnics. I don't think there's much of that happening in 64, but, it is what it is.
But they're watching what they think is that from a safe distance, which probably was not from a safe distance.
So they're writing letters, not to Jacob Engelbrecht, but they're writing letters to the mayor. Is the mayor, like, we're working on it, or is there, like, some gamesmanship of delay?
I think they were trying... Oh, gosh, it's been a long time since I looked at these, but I feel like they were maybe trying to, like, get the number down.
I feel like they're buying for time, too, honestly.
They're buying for time. I don't know why they were buying for time, because they had to have known what the odds were, which was not great.
So before we move into the question I have about Lew Wallace, Frederick pays up. How do they pay this? That's a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of money today. How do they pay that amount of money in?
There's 5 banks that come together and pay the money, and then the city pays the banks back. And they get the money back through bonds, taxes, and it's finally paid off in 1951.
I was going to ask the end of that story. So it takes into the 20th century to finish
1951.
Yep. Well,
Do you imagine being those people who are still paying, like, bonds and taxes?
Dude, what about the modern pensions that were paid out as recently as 2020? I think Irene Triplett was the last receiver of a Civil War era pension when she passed in 2020. But it's like, could you imagine being the person that files that, like, administratively? Like, am I really, like, you go to your boss, you're like, am I really paying out a Civil War pension this year? They're like, yeah, dude, you are.
Well, they're
Get that in the mail.
Yeah, get it in the mail.
Right
They need that money.
every so often there will be somebody who presents a bill, asking for Frederick to be paid back. But, according to the whole reparations, it wasn't Union soldiers who did the damage.
Right, so that's...
But they do on occasion, it still comes up.
Even now?
Yeah.
Even after everybody's got all their money
Since
back?
I've been there, I
think
know it
Ehrlich
came up
brought
once.
it up. Yeah. It's not something that's being actively fought over in the halls of Congress, but it has come up before.
Well, I would hope not. I mean, we have other things we need to kind of be focusing on now at this point, where they've got their money back. The Cold War has, like...
We're helping pay for other wars.
It's like
at this
ended.
point.
It's ended and restarted again, seemingly. Like, we got other fish to fry than the money of 1864. All right, so moving away from the cool ransom stories, I always think that's a really neat thing that it kind of backdrops the Monocacy campaign that you don't always get.
I have a fantastic connection, though.
All right, do it.
So, La Hermitage So when Victoire sells La Hermitage and she moves into downtown Frederick near St. John's, she retains a few enslaved people. One of those people who becomes free, his name is Butler. I believe it's Butler. And so I remember when we were doing this, there was a reference. I think it's a little bit of an urban myth, but there's got to be some truth to it, that when they're delivering the ransom, they're like, I don't know, a couple dollars short or so many cents short or something. And that a free African American, well, they don't say that, but a free black from that period, and his name is Butler. They give his full name. And that he like basically is like takes it out of his wallet and gives like the last couple dollars to put into the ransom to hand to Early.
The Vicinity heirs are a part of this story, maybe.
So I was like, that name rings a bell. Like I know that name, and so I was like going back through because I thought it was through the Vicinity heirs. Same name, the age is like the same. Like the same time period, it matches up.
Yeah.
And he actually has a significant obituary in the paper when he dies, that he was a well-known citizen of Frederick.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I would lay money on this Butler who was freed by Victoire being the one who's present when the ransom.
Oh, we're definitely going to come back to that one when there's more information on it. That sounds awesome. I feel like, what is St. John's a Catholic church?
Yes.
It is.
Okay, then it's not the one I'm thinking of. All right, are we ready to talk about fighting now really quick?
Oh, was there a battle?
Yeah, because here's what I want to ask.
Yeah.
I've already asked multiple times, who's aware of this, who's aware of that at this point in time in the story, blah, blah, blah. When is Lew Wallace aware that this is a train moving right at him? Is it Middletown? Is it?
Takes a minute.
Yeah. Like, I think it also takes John Garrett to a degree. I think he personally rides out and observes his own railroad and is like, this is real.
Not quite personally rides out, but he's being personally informed. What's fascinating about that story, Pat, is that Garrett is aware before the War Department is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, he's got money more directly attached to what's happening.
And he's got his telegraph operators on the B&O who are literally saying at the end of June, there's Confederate cavalry cutting our lines.
And I'm often surprised that John Garrett isn't listened to a little bit more because he's got a little bit of power.
And they've been using his railroad.
Yeah.
You should listen to that guy.
I think he's a pretty well-respected guy, and he wields a bit of power there. But yet when he is telling Union Command, like,
this is real.
We got something. We got a problem here. Things are about to go.
So when do you think
weird.
Lew Wallace is first like, okay, this is not something that's going to skirt around us. This is something that's going to come. Basically, the tornado is not going to miss us.
When Garrett walks into his office.
Yeah. So in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So he's not even on site yet.
No.
So he's still at the 8th Corps headquarters.
He has no idea what's happening.
Yeah, we're talking probably July 4.
Yeah.
Oh, he's like shooting fireworks off. He's like, get out of here, John. I'm busy.
Not. Nobody's communicating to him about what potentially is happening. Maybe because they don't really think it's going to be a thing. They think Hunter's going to come back and take care of it.
Right.
And that's not going to happen. And so it could be that they just think it's really just the remnants of some Confederates that Hunter will take care of it. It's not going to be a problem.
Is Lew also trying to keep a low profile since he was scapegoated real hard at Shiloh?
I don't know that he's trying to keep a low profile, but I would suggest people don't talk to him.
Right. I would agree with that. I think Wallace is definitely looking for ways to be part of this war still. He was very pleased that he was requested by Lincoln to command the Middle Department in early 64.
Railroaded him pretty hard in 62.
They do, but he has done very well in late 62 and 63 with the defense, with helping to raise troops in Indiana, with the defenses of Cincinnati, and because of this and his relations with working in an urban environment for the war effort, he has literally been plucked by Lincoln to command the Middle Department out of Baltimore. And that's where he is in July of 64, when John Garrett, like Tracy said, walks into his office and says, we've got a problem.
Like a big problem.
And a big one. Because Tracy's absolutely right. The War Department does not believe him. They're saying things like, oh, it's 500, 600 cavalry. They think it's just a cavalry raid.
But that's a huge raid anyway.
It's a significant raid, but it's not something that Harper's Ferry would need to be worried about. It's not something that is going to necessarily disrupt the railroad. It could cut it for a while, but it's not going to disrupt the whole thing. It's when these telegraph operators are reporting much larger numbers that Garrett himself is saying there is a movement in the valley, and it's not a raid. Okay. It's not a cavalry raid. There's something much bigger coming down the valley.
So we're talking like 5 days before this thing erupts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
it's quick.
There's a lot happening here.
I think once he gets to Harper's Ferry, now we know.
Right.
Yeah.
Has Gilmore gone into his raid in the interim of all this?
No, not yet.
Not yet. All right. So
that's about to kick off.
Yeah. All right. So Lew Wallace, at least, is he in Frederick by the time Middletown is being ransomed, or is he still on his way?
That's why there's a fight. That's why there's a fight at Middletown and West Frederick, because Wallace, Erastus Tyler, he arrives at the Junction on July 6th.
Okay.
With the First Separate Brigade, I believe they're called.
I hear Erastus Tyler, and I just think about a plant. I'm sorry.
That's true.
Do you have a plant named Erastus Tyler?
We may or may not have at one point had a plant named Erastus Tyler.
Yes.
Is it a dead plant?
I do not believe Erastus is with us anymore.
He has departed.
Yeah. Like every plant I've ever tried to keep. All right. So is it in Lew Wallace's office in Baltimore where Grant is called upon to send extra troops? Like, how does all this shake out in like 72 hours?
Yeah, it's pretty quick. I think after they get through Harper's Ferry, that's when Grant's like, oh God.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got to do something. And so he's sending troops to Harper's Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
But
they're being offloaded in Monocacy Junction.
They have to get through the junction to get to Harper's Ferry. And basically, Ricketts is told there,
get off the train.
Yeah, get off the train.
You're going to fight here. How many troops does Grant... first of all, how many troops does Lew Wallace have in Frederick before Grant's guys arrive?
He's got about 3,300 men with the First Separate Brigade and the 8th Illinois Cavalry and a handful of mounted infantry that have been dragged out of Washington.
Where was the 8th Illinois not during the war?
Thank you.
That
and
is
I think
question.
the 8th Illinois does not get enough credit.
Preach.
Because they were told to go to Harper's Ferry as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Clendenin got word of what was happening, and he reported to Wallace and said, do you need help?
Like, what's up? You need me?
He gets sent with them, with these guys, and he's got veteran troops, so he's helping out with that. And he sticks it out. He is the last one fighting at the end of the day.
Dude, those guys are out in my area of the world in 61 or 2, I believe. When I was doing my last job in roofing and remodeling down around Prince George's County, when the story is more about Booth's flight from Washington, those guys are a part of looking for Booth and Harold. It's like everywhere I go, I run into mentions, markers, something that's talking about the 8th Illinois.
The best cavalry units in the war, and easily one of the best, if not the best, in the East. And I know there's some cavalry lovers out there who can throw different regiments out, and they're fine regiments too, I'm certain. But the 8th Illinois is in all 3 major Confederate movements above the Potomac. 62, 63, they fire the first shot, of course, at Gettysburg, and they're here at Monocacy. They are going to be one of only 2 cavalry regiments that can consistently move with and beat Mosby, to the point where Mosby's Rangers are saying every time we tangoed with them, we knew there was going to be blood.
First of all, Mosby never lost. Have you ever talked to anybody that likes John Mosby? He never lost.
I can promise you Mosby did lose.
Secondly, especially that one fight right near Harper's Ferry where they killed his own guys for the most part. That was pretty good.
But that was Cole's cavalry.
That was Cole's cavalry. But actually, Cole, that's the fight, right? Where Cole's is like, basically, shoot at them if they're on a horse.
Right.
Like,
it's one of Cole's one of his subordinates that says that.
We'll get into that another day. That was a great little story. But was that hard for you, Matt, as a Michigander, to give Illinois some credit? Great Lakes states and all.
I have no problem with Illinois. My youngest brother's in Illinois.
All right.
There's some great history in Illinois.
Is it just Ohio?
It's the land of Lincoln.
Is it just Ohio that you guys beef with?
If I was, yes, we beef with.
Are they your West Virginia?
Is Toledo worth all this beef?
Considering we got the Upper Peninsula for Toledo, it's absolutely worth it.
You got the Upers. All right. Well, we will not rip on Matt's Michiganderness for much longer than necessary. So that's the rest of the show today. No. All right. So 3,300 federal U.S. troops.
Are there initially?
What is Grant dispatching to kind of get back up there? Is he sending
3rd Division of the 6th Corps.
How many guys is that? Is that all infantry?
Yes, it is all infantry. It's about 3,000.
So all the artillery, and again, not much of it, but all the artillery that's there is already there. They're not shipping artillery up.
No, you've got Alexander's Baltimore Battery, and then so you got six under him, and then at the Junction in those blockhouses, there was a mountain howitzer and a 24-pounder howitzer. The mountain howitzer did not have any ammunition.
All right,
but there was ammunition for the 24-pounder.
So we're already down one gun, even though we've got the gun. We don't have the ability to shoot it. All right, so we got about, 6,500 federal U.S. troops at this point, up against twice as many Confederates at this point.
With a whole lot more artillery.
Right, so when does this go from it's going to happen to it's happening? Is it the evening of the 8th when people move into direct position, or is it directly on the morning of the 9th?
The morning of the 9th.
All right, let's get into that.
The farmers are still working in the fields. Yeah, Worthington talks about that they're still harvesting in the morning, and he actually names 2 of their enslaved guys out there. Ephraim Tyler something Butler. He's got 4 names.
All right. Not the same Butler.
No. And actually, I want to look that up, and that we might put that in the notes or something to make sure I have that guy's name right that was with the ransom. And anyhow, they're told once they kind of come in again, and they're told to take the horses to Sugarloaf Mountain, which is what most of the neighboring farms did. So I think there were 200 altogether horses that were taken to Sugarloaf Mountain. All that was left was Davy, the carriage horse, and a mule.
A mule.
And they would not.
Stubborn jackass.
They would not still be on that farm at the end of the day.
Right.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Old Davy is utilized, yes.
Yeah, they're both utilized. One may have rode off into the sunset and been fine. The other one not so much.
Boo.
Yeah. There's also a rooster that kind of apparently goes through the battle, but I can't imagine that they would not have killed that rooster at some point.
Not if Alexander Porter was there. Chicken could definitely not live on that field.
Yeah,
Good reference,
yeah.
Thank you. I am in rare form today. All right, so
they're still gathering crops. The Mance family from the Junction, he's the one that is in charge of the Junction area. He works for the railroad, and he stays, and he's still sending messages. And then his family goes and stays. Oh God, do they stay with the Worthington family? Or Thomas family. They stay with one of those families.
I feel like it's the Thomases because I feel like the only people in the Worthington house are Worthingtons, if I recall correctly.
I can't remember. I tell
the
you,
Worthingtons and their enslaved are hiding in the basement. I think it is the Thomases because it seems to be where everybody's filtering.
that Thomas basement was crowded, and
still
it is
the best
not.
Run over there too, or the best ride
we
out
don't
in their
know where
house?
The best family was.
Yeah, that's an interesting
that is a
side
mystery.
note.
We do not know. We've never
really?
seen reference to did they stay in the house in the basement or did they leave. We have never. And we've talked to descendants of the best, and nobody knows.
Is that an evolved interpretation? Because I feel like once upon a time, from a ranger who's not there anymore, I heard directly that they went to the Thomases.
They lied.
Well,
not
it has evolved somewhat because we did think that they stayed in the cellar, but more recent research has we know that his father is just north of the battlefield. His father's house is basically where the mall is now. And so now there's this speculation that they may have
ran there.
Bolted.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know the house over by where that historic house that has some outbuildings with it. That's by Walmart.
Yeah.
And then there's all these new buildings all around the old house.
Yeah.
That was best.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking the one over Grove Road.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, yeah. No, by the Walmart where Walmart is.
Isn't that Walmart off the other side of Grove Road? Or Guilford?
Maybe it is.
It's kind of
Guilford. Is that Guilford Drive? There's 2 Walmarts in Frederick. There's one up by Monocacy Boulevard, and then there's the older Walmart.
The older one.
Okay. Maybe I'm forgetting. It's a G name road that it's off of.
Yeah.
You might be right, but I'm. Yeah,
well, it's a big old historic house, and it even has like the smokehouse and the ice house and all this stuff.
It's like
and
right at the end of the parking lot of Walmart.
Surrounded by modern buildings. It's really sad.
It's utilized by a bank now, isn't it, or something?
I think
medical
you're right.
Something and. Yeah.
We're definitely all
You're
talking
right.
about the same place for sure.
So
the road,
we've gotten
whatever,
a little
but
off topic, but
that's
yeah,
the
that was
place.
Best House. And so did they go there? We don't know.
Right.
Could have been.
Right.
Yeah, the Worthingtons are in their basement. We know that some of the enslaved are in the basement. And then John Worthington's apparently watching from the second story of his house until he decides to go outside and meet Breckenridge. That's later in the battle.
Okay.
And gets his cane shot out from underneath of him.
Supposedly.
Yeah. And at the Thomas house, they're very crowded. Because it's, even though the house is big, the basement is not.
Right.
It's creepy deepy.
Yeah.
Full of snakes and spiders.
I was about to ask if I can go in it, but I retract. I don't want to. You just said the parts, snakes and spiders. I've seen a basement before.
I've been in it.
Been in there
was
many
gross.
times.
Yeah, and but in that you had the Thomas family. So you had the parents. You had two of the daughters. And you had Mamie Tyler, who was a visiting friend. You had Antoinette Gambrel, two of her sons. She's 7 months pregnant.
They came over from the mill.
They came from Gambrel Mill. Yep. So, and then several dogs and the enslaved.
Wow, it is
are all in the basement.
Sardine situation.
A lot of people in that basement. And then at Gambrel, the story is that, early in the morning, Mr. Gambrel's there. He's talking to Ricketts on the porch. And then sort of as things start getting heated up or whatever, Mr. Gambrel goes into the mill. He stays in the mill. Joined with him in the mill was Samuel Thomas, because he had been home for the holidays. Remember, 4th of July.
Right.
He's been home for the holidays with two of his good friends. One of those friends is engaged to his sister. Another friend is engaged to Mamie Tyler, who I just mentioned, who was there visiting. So they're all having this really nice holiday. But when General Tyler comes down to the Junction area with the guys to sort of assess what's happening, he decides that these guys who are in their early 20s,
Military age.
Yeah.
and that are, they believe, known Confederate sympathizers, that they're lingering to join the Confederate Army.
Oh.
So they get impressed into the Union line. So they're not given uniforms.
I was going to say, are they out there in uniforms?
No, they are not in uniform. And so the 2 days of the skirmishing, they're able to kind of get behind the line. And then the morning of the battle, they're basically told, skedaddle across this bridge.
Get out of here, dude.
And so they hide in the mill. And then, but Alice and Mamie, early in the morning, are then, there's an awesome letter where one of the soldiers talks about them sort of floating across the bridge in their gowns and whatever, and searching for Lew Wallace to give up the men, so that they can come back. But they were already gone. And
who do they get impressed by? The 11th Maryland? I think it is.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's big concern, and unfortunately, their commander recognizes this isn't a good situation for these kids, and and he says, get out of here, and so they hide in the mill during the battle. Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I did not mean to be here, honestly, at this point.
This holiday is really not going
this
well.
has escalated in a way I did not envision.
But what a story they'll have for their weddings.
I was not expecting these types of fireworks.
So, real quick before we get to the actual, let's, get into the first actions of the fight here. I always find it fascinating that Ricketts has started this war in charge of our regular Army artillery and is now here as an infantry commander. And it's like he's been wounded a whole bunch, severely. It's like, what a ride.
Captured a little
while. And John Gordon on the other side of the battlefield has a very similar, just wild ride to this point in the war. It's like neither of these
The fact
guys...
that he's still alive is amazing.
Right.
Preach. I mean, in 1862, he's wounded 5 times, very famously.
They try to kill him really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Is he related to Chuck Norris by any chance? But no, it's a fascinating thing to me. It's going from, one MO, this guy's, because Ricketts is, he's in the regular Army prior to the war. When he's at Manassas, he's not there with a volunteer unit. He's there with, I believe, Company I of 1st U.S. Artillery. So that's his job, is big cannons. But here in 1864, it's the situation of skill sets and everything has all changed to just he's got infantry here at this fight. Does he have heavies under him at that fight?
He does have some heavies. Right. He's got the ninth,
Maybe that's
ninth
the
New York heavy.
We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's get into it then. So we this fight is here. Lew Wallace has got his guys. He's got his 6,500 guys here. There's 12,000 guys. It's early in the morning. Everybody knows that they're all in the same neighborhood now. How does it get to the fight? Like, who makes the first moves to shooting?
The Confederates set up their infantry, basically coming down Georgetown Pike and under Ramseur, General Ramseur, and he sets them up. They've got artillery. They've put out artillery. They've got infantry going, and that's really kind of where they start. They're going to try to pressure, get across the covered wooden bridge. You know, this is a fight that Early's not like gearing up for.
Right,
you know,
that's right.
Now, that said, he does have sort of this contingency plan, is that he had, you know, said to McCausland's cavalry, you know, he wanted them to find a ford, get across the ford and be on the other side, and it help sort of push them across so they can get across that bridge. Because he knows there is somebody there. But they just don't expect this big fight.
Right, because they're untrained. Not only is there a small force, but they're basically just a bunch of guys in uniforms holding a place irrelevant.
Yeah. So he's expecting a skirmish. He's expecting to get through pretty quickly.
Yeah. There's already been some preliminary skirmishing earlier that morning north of the current battlefield at what's known as Jug Bridge. Confederate forces around 6 a.m. attempt to cross Jug Bridge. They're unsuccessful due to 3 regiments of Ohio National Guard that fight very well, have no business fighting as well as they do, but they certainly do.
Almost nobody in the U.S. side in this fight has any business fighting as well as they do for as long as they do. Like, that is the beginning, that is the tone setting for this whole day, I guess.
Right. But because of the resistance they had along the Baltimore Pike or the National Road up at Jug Bridge, they have shifted down to exactly what Tracy said, down to the Georgetown Pike around 8:30 in the morning.
I was going to ask what time we're at. Yeah. So,
and if you want to know more about the action at the Jug Bridge, you might want to come and look at the schedule for the 160th commemoration of the Battle of Monocacy. There may or may not be a hike dealing with all the
History Things podcast is going to engage in the 160 at Monocacy in a big way. This episode is out only a few short days before the actual battle anniversary. This episode is out on July 1st. So again, happy 4th of July. Get your asses to that site in Frederick and engage in the great storytelling, and look out for us doing some From the Field. That is where the season 5 From the Field story is going to happen. And so about 8:30 in the morning, this is go time now. And it's still, even when Ramseur's moving into position, this is still not something Jubal Early thinks is going to take terribly long, right?
Nope.
All right. So what happens next?
Wallace does a really good job of positioning his men and putting the ones who are a little bit more inexperienced in a place where they're sort of protecting that bridge, but they've got a bit of a buffer. And then he's going to throw skirmishers on the other side of the covered wooden bridge. That's where the 9th New York Heavies are going to be.
Some of them, yep.
Yeah, some of them. And then a company of 10th Vermont is going to be put out there with some of those Potomac Home Brigade guys, Maryland guys. And so there's going to be, it's the fight of the 300, Pat.
I was going to say, like the Thermopylae 300, like Leonidas is here.
It is the fight of the 300.
All right. Does this go better?
Very dramatic. It does go better for them.
Yeah, not all of them die.
Yeah, not all of them.
Correct.
No,
okay,
no.
Because all of the 300 die, I think.
Yeah, all of our 300
except for one, right? That's how we know the story, right? Because one guy didn't die. Yeah. That's how it always works. 299.
Jacob Engelbrecht was sitting there taking notes.
The movie would be less cool if it was called 299.
That's true.
It's just called 300. God, his name is Jacob Engelbrechtus. He was a Spartan.
Erectus.
No, not Erectus, Matt. Get out of the gutter. Engelbrechtus.
This
is my still shaking off the kid plague from the previous recording we did. But all right, so Jubal Early is witnessing this sort of, is repulse a good word for the Jug Bridge action? Like the Ohio troops repulse the Confederate attack there?
They're getting a lot more resistance than they had anticipated.
So they're not making progress, but they're not being driven off yet.
Right. Okay. Correct. And sharpshooters are put into the best barn. They're putting a lot of pressure there, at the covered bridge as well. And then The Union artillery is trying to figure out, get these skirmishers out of this barn, and finally they get their aim and they set that barn on fire. So again, here comes part of that civilian story. First harvest of the year, gone, burned down.
The second time that's happened to this property, because in 62 they lose a ton of crop as well.
Yep. And so we'll say that that 24-pounder howitzer, while they were able to make pretty good work of it in the morning, at some point, somebody loaded it backwards.
Oh, this is the gun. Okay, I knew this happened, but I didn't realize it was the 24-pound howitzer.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
So they spiked their own gun, basically.
Yep.
Yeah, so they had to spike their own gun.
So what are we at? We started with 6. We didn't have ammo for 1, so we're down to 5, and now we...
No, we started with 8.
Oh, with 8.
Didn't have ammo for 1,
So
so we're down to 7. Now we're down to 6.
Because we just botched
Right.
loading of the
Yeah.
big one.
Right.
Oh, my
and
God.
and
Yeah.
it's the big one.
You can imagine that somebody was really upset about that.
Without telling the full artillery story, what do we got? We got 6 guns against roughly how many?
So there are, depending on who you read, there's between 38 and 40 cannon in the Confederate.
At their disposal.
At
They
their
didn't use all
disposal.
of that.
Right.
They're going to use about 18.
That's still 3 times
Yeah.
as much
Yeah,
firepower.
it's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad odds.
It's not a good situation artillery-wise.
Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness.
But Tracy's right. The Baltimore light artillery is utilized very well. They move those guns around. They use the terrain. Wallace is going to help place some of those guns. They use the terrain very well. It's Frederick's Baltimore light artillery.
Wait a
isn't it?
minute. They didn't have red fanny packs
Alexander's
back then
Baltimore
to clear...
Alexander, sorry.
They didn't
Frederick
have red
Alexander's
fanny
his name.
packs out there to clear the guns?
Steve Fan was not there with his
gonna say,
red.
shout out
with
to our
his
double fanny fan.
Yeah, his dual fanny pack.
What is his hashtag? Double fanny pack?
And by the
Something
way,
like that.
he got that from Monocacy National Battlefield.
Yes.
He
Did
got
he?
that idea. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. He was so impressed
Yeah, I
with
think-
that he had to go buy 2
That's so
just
on
so he could
brand.
one up the other Rangers.
I want to have him on this show for a lot of reasons.
Oh,
but
he
I,
would love to do it.
But I
I'm
think
sure of
I
that.
think the biggest reason I know is I just want to grill him over the fanny pack and the associated hashtag. Like, how convenient for you, sir? How convenient for you, and also well done. I'm not as clever as that. I didn't realize that he got that from your site. That's
Yeah,
so funny.
Working with Dank, I think.
So
Oh well. All right, so
that was
6
Kathy
guns.
Bueller started that.
Oh, did she do the duel first?
No. What? Just the red fanny pack.
Got it.
All right, so the gun is down. You know they're at their 6 gun limit. They have 6 guns for the remainder of the battle, right? The federal
Right.
U.S. troops. So 6 guns will last the entire rest of the fight.
Yes.
Do they all stay in U.S. troops' hands by the
Yes,
end of
they
that
do.
fight? Okay.
They do.
Despite how things go.
Matter of fact, they like to say that they arrived with 6 and left with 7 or 8.
8, yeah.
With 8.
Yep.
So they took back the 2 pieces of artillery that had been there initially, but they took them so that the Confederates couldn't take them.
Oh, groovy. That's
for
a
them.
successful
And I
extraction.
don't think it was an easy task either.
No, from what I understand, reading the Baltimore Light Artillery's history is that they basically unbuckle the 24-pounder and manhandle it into a cannon, into a carriage,
Really?
or a wagon or something like that.
Like the tube?
The tube, yeah,
They'd leave the carriage behind
Yeah.
because whatever. But
right.
They picked
exactly.
up like a 1,200-pound tube?
Apparently.
Adrenaline, pure adrenaline.
Yeah, I mean, I probably did it by myself, honestly.
Well,
It's one soldier.
It was like, get out of here before we get killed.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what? I hope I'm never personally in that kind of fight or flight situation. Having been in a few fight or flights that were not as dangerous as that, I hope to never experience one as dangerous as that. All right, so infantry is engaging in multiple places now. Things are not going well. What's Jubilee? When does he start realizing, like, damn it, I have to send in more troops to this. Like, these guys are not leaving.
So while that action is happening at the Junction, and that starts around 7, 8 o'clock, probably closer to 8 o'clock. So then just after that, maybe around 10:30, McCausland and his guys, about 1,200 cavalry, are going to find the ford onto the Worthington property. And then, so they're going to come onto the property, and that's where they're going to end up engaging with Ricketts' men. So there had been, Wallace had positioned those veteran troops sort of along what we call today Araby Church Road, what it was part of the Georgetown Pike at the time. And they actually talk about, and today, if you're driving there on Araby Church Road and you're looking at the landscape in terms of the battle, you can see what they're talking about because they talk about being there and using sort of the embankment that's there as a natural breastwork. So that's where they initially are going to be. And then a skirmish line is thrown up between Thomas and Worthington Farm. And so 8th Illinois Cavalry,
again,
here we are. We got a company of them, and they're kind of scouring the river, burning some of the smaller bridges that the farmers use. And they're scouting the area, and they're the ones who are going to first engage with McCausland and his men. And so it's only one company, but it's sort of as McCausland's men are coming over, they're engaging with them and basically sizing them up. Who is it, or it doesn't matter so much who it is, but how many,
right.
And where they're coming, so that they can get that information back. And so they're gonna go back towards Baker Valley Road, back where the rest of the 8th Illinois are, and give them the information about what's happening. And so that is Ricketts is going to have, it's about a line of about 1,000 men, and they're going to be kind of hunkered down behind a fence row. And so this is the very dramatic
I was going to ask, is this where they pop up and kind of mow down, and the Confederates are like, oh, Jesus, like that type of, that's that scene?
Now, the one thing that I've always found interesting about this movement is that when McCausland's men get up there, they're told to dismount. They're going to engage, as infantry. Well, they're mounted infantry, I guess. Cavalry, they're cavalry, but there's not that many cavalry fights.
I never can keep it straight. Mounted infantry, dismounted cavalry. Like, I feel like if you're on a horse...
We have to realize, too, by this point in the war, cavalry tactics have begun to change dramatically, and it's becoming more and more common for cavalry to basically fight more like mounted infantry. Mounted infantry move around on horseback, get off, and fight. Cavalry traditionally stayed mounted, but by this point in the war, you're seeing cavalry dismount and move forward on foot into the engagement, and that's exactly what's happening.
Also preserves horses a little bit better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're told to dismount, and typically what would happen is you would have like one man stay with 4 horses.
Okay.
But in this case, and this is what I've always thought was kind of odd. In this case, they're not told to do that. They're told to just dismount and go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they don't know what they're facing at that point. They still think that they're just kind of going around. They're going to go around and get towards the Georgetown Pike and push through. They don't realize that they're going to be facing these veteran troops. So it's, on one hand, it feels like there's some urgency to it, as if they're being told to like dismount and get into it, rather than have somebody stay back with them, which I never quite understood. I remember, if we may have had this conversation, and one that it was a commander who had been kind of thrust into command, and perhaps he just wasn't as experienced. Mm. But I don't know. And that's a topic, I guess, that's up for discussion about why that particular command was given.
I suspect, and this is just my theory because I haven't really seen it fleshed out like this, but I suspect because McCausland and Early believe they're tangoing with just militia, that they're trying to put as much punch as possible into this attack and just push them out of the way, basically in one go. Things have gotten slowed down at the junction and at the bridges. Let's stop wasting time, hit them in the flank, and just be done with it.
So this is like enough.
Right. That's what I suspect is happening.
Right.
Because,
frustration.
Yeah.
Yep, because like Tracy said, they're told to tie up their horses or turn them loose. No man would be spared to hold them.
Mm-hmm. Did you just drop a quote out of your brain like that?
A little bit.
You're a fucking genius, man.
But the cavalry would traditionally go in with 25% losses because of this every fourth man issue. But he's not dealing with that. He's putting his entire roughly 1,200 Cavaliers into this attack because he just wants to push them out of the way and be done with it.
All right.
So what he doesn't know, what he doesn't know,
a few moments later.
A few moments later.
Pop, 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 pop.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this particular movement is John Worthington's on the second floor of his house watching.
Right.
And he says he can see the Union infantry there hunkered down behind this fence row that the Confederates can't see. And he talks about them walking as if on parade, basically.
the Confederates.
Yeah,
like
the
they
Confederates.
don't know what they're walking into.
Yeah, like he says they're marching like as if on parade, and they're walking straight into this line. And Wallace describes the movement because he claims where Wallace is exactly and what he says. Sometimes we're not sure, but
it's a theme in general.
He's quite the writer. He's very dramatic. He wrote Ben-Hur. Come
dramatic.
on,
we were going to get there at the end, but you're right.
It's very eloquent writing.
He's got a
even
big
his
brain.
after-action reports.
Yeah, and he was everywhere all the time.
There was a firefight.
Yes.
Good reference.
That's who he is.
So he's describing watching Ricketts.
Okay.
Watching his men. And he's very nervous. He has this anxiety because he's like, Ricketts is not ordering his men to get up. And the Confederates are approaching ever so
He
close.
doesn't see from his perspective that they actually have the drop by doing this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So he's like, he sees the guys, hunkered down behind this fence, and he sees Ricketts like standing there, but not giving them the order to get up. And he's like, what is happening here? And then he says in his eloquent way, and he says, as if in one movement, they all rise at the same time. Upon command, they all rise. And then fire this volley into the Confederates who are about maybe 125 yards away.
Right.
They're right on top.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize. So I know there's a few parts of this story that I've experienced through both of you and a number of others over the years that just forever stick out to me, and this is one of them. That's why I was like, oh, is this that moment? I didn't realize it was that short of a range.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, these are guns that are like they're training these guys to shoot at 300 and 400 yards. These guns are deadly, whether you aimed at it or not, at 1,000 yards. 125 yards? I mean, that's like 1862 right at the Bronner farm, like when Stonewall and Iron Brigade to be are 80 yards apart, but like we're not doing too much of that in 1864. People are observing those 300 and 400 yard distances. This is like a football field and some change.
Yeah,
right?
this is the moment where,
American football field for our UK listeners.
Yeah, but this is that moment where they're like, oh,
yeah, we stepped in it.
Yeah, this isn't what we were told we were going to be into, right? So at that point, obviously, they're pushed back. They're going back towards the Worthington House. They're back, and then they're going to try to okay, what's going on here?
Right.
Somebody gets the bright idea. One of the officers, who would like to stand on my shoulders and see what's going on?
Oh, this works really well in all wars with firearms.
Yeah.
Standing up high above things to be seen clearly.
Yeah, it didn't work out too good for them either.
It works out exactly as I'm probably thinking, right?
Yeah,
okay.
both of them done.
Oh,
They're
both of them?
Both shot.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, both of them catching some lead.
They're both gone on that.
Okay.
But yeah, they sort of assess the situation, and then they decide they're going to make another attack. But I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself here.
Just a touch.
Because things are going on in two parts of the battlefield at the same time at this point.
And that is forever our struggle with interpretation.
Right.
Like, how do you tell these types of stories that are not linear? They are simultaneous.
So sort of in that period, that lapse between attacks out on the Worthington and Thomas farms, you have skirmishing still happening at the Junction. Sometime around noon, though, we believe that Wallace gives the order to have the bridge burned. And he does this because he doesn't feel like his guys can hold it any longer. And ultimately that's the point of this battle is don't let the Confederates cross the river, or hold them off as long as you possibly can. And by burning that bridge, it's going to keep them on that side a little bit longer. And so the order is given to burn the bridge. The 9th New York Heavies are there. They know to withdraw. They're given the order to burn the bridge, so they obviously know to withdraw.
You're talking the wagon bridge, not the train bridge. That
correct.
The one they're ordered to burn is
the covered wooden bridge over the river. And so they have the order. They set the bridge on fire. Word is not going to get to the 300.
The $2.99 for those keeping track. I'm just kidding.
Who are on the other side, and Wallace knows it. But he thinks they'll be captured, but that's the gamble he's going to have to take.
I mean, you have to, right? You're not playing from an even hand to begin with, so you have to make hard decisions.
Yeah. So these guys are put in a bad position, and to make things worse, so the general in charge of them in the morning, General Chandler, he sort of skedaddles away. He's supposed to be in charge. He's not in charge. He leaves, and so the person that's sort of thrust into command here is Captain Brown. Is he a captain?
He's a captain.
And he's not comfortable with the situation because he's not really been in battle before. When he is facing these Confederates, he is afraid he is going to fire on his own men. Apparently, the uniforms look darker, many conversations about why that may be, but regardless of that, he hands command over to George Davis, Lieutenant George Davis. And he's with the 10th Vermont. He's a seasoned soldier, knows a little bit more about what he's doing, so he takes over command. No idea, like, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing other than, the bridge has been burned and we're stuck here on this side. So there's going to be several more movements, several more flanking movements by the Confederates, trying to push them, and they're gonna hold them off. And eventually, he's going to be able to get his guys back across the railroad bridge. And there's going to be several of them that basically sacrifice themselves to try to hold up the Confederates.
I think I remember that. I think you guys have an account either in the museum up there or in one of the publications that I have where somebody is basically talking about basically a 10th Vermonter was like, we were intentionally, not like malicious. My words are weird here, forgive me, but they're left on the crap end of the stick on purpose because you got to do the work to keep these guys where they are, and hopefully we make it to the train bridge. And I believe it's a 10th Vermonter and not a 9th New Yorker. His name is forgetting me. Do you guys have one of those on display, like where somebody's specifically talking about?
I know what quote you're talking about. Okay. It may be part of the exhibit.
I feel like I saw it in the museum.
Yeah, I believe it is too.
Yeah, because it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this story, and that's why it's a shock to me that as engaged as we are with the smaller stories of the American Civil War, like this one is still not as big as I think it should be. This is a high-stakes poker match, and only thing we're missing are the big, sexy names of Lee and Grant and McClellan, but the stakes here are big. I mean, they're big. Mm-hmm.
I would really...
They're high. Yeah, high stakes. There you go.
I would like to be able to, just for a moment, be able to see exactly what that movement looked like. Mm-hmm. Because as they're, going across that railroad bridge, the Confederate artillery has stopped because they're afraid they're going to fire on their own people. And... but yeah, because you have Confederate infantry who are directly behind, the Union infantry who's going across, and I mean, there's even accounts of them saying, they've got them, the Confederate soldier has grabbed a Federal soldier by, the back of his collar, collar, and they're trying to push him off the bridge. So it's. Yeah,
this isn't a game of yards anymore. This is a game of inches where we're right here.
Yeah. So Davis received a Medal of Honor for getting the men across that bridge.
I didn't know that.
He did.
One of the legitimate Medals of Honor that were awarded, not one of these popularity Medals of Honor that went around the war.
There's 2 Medal of Honor recipients at the Battle of Monocacy, both of them from the 10th Vermont.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know there were 2. Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome.
It's almost a third.
Who's the almost third?
A surgeon in the 149th Ohio.
Just saving lives.
Saving lives, and that's probably why he does not get it, is because it's part of his job. But he elects to stay behind when their lines eventually go at the end of the day.
It's such a weird thing. Everybody's doing their job in the act of winning,
right?
Or not winning. I shouldn't say that. Earning a Medal of Honor. You're going above and beyond, but you're doing your job. You're a soldier, you're a pilot, you're a surgeon. Arbitrary decision makers that weren't there to begin with. Mm-hmm. Well, basically, to me, if you fight and you survive it and you didn't just act like a coward, you deserve a Medal of Honor because you did something I could never do. So shout out to all of you in our current and former militaries. All right, so this is getting into a bigger fight. We've had a stall at the Jug Bridge. We've had a stall on the flank moving into the Worthington. We've had basically the path we need to take to get across the river and into our path on to Washington is now directly gone. So we're going to have to figure that out once this fight is wrapped. Is this where Jubal Early realizes this is a fight? This is no longer a skirmish?
Yeah, I think that particularly once McCausland encounters that line of Union soldiers, they're starting to get a big hint there.
Like, this is something. This isn't just little. At that point, does he commit everything, or is he still kind of holding reserves?
He's still holding reserves to a degree. McCausland makes a second attack on the Union line there, on the federal line. I'm saying Union.
We can do it. It's not like it's bad.
We can, but we're trying to move forward, and it,
I'm with it.
I don't know.
I'm not going to gig you for it, but I'm with it.
So
I'm a Union man. I can't help it. Now, whatever.
And at that point, they're going to outflank.
All right.
So they're going to try to get around that skirmish line, and they make pretty good work of it. They go over the toe of Brooks Hill, in front of Brooks Hill. They get around that line, up towards Baker Valley Road, and then kind of go around. So they do a pretty good job of that. And then the 14th New Jersey says, nay.
Yeah.
Right.
Not today.
Yeah, Grandpa Springsteen came in here and started stone cold stunnering everyone.
Yeah, nay.
Yeah.
And they charge up the field, and it's very dramatic.
It
as
is.
if fighting for their own homes, Friedenberg says.
I'm not even joking. We are going to reach out to the Springsteen, and we'll probably get no response. Interesting, we throw Hail Marys here on the podcast. We had our producer reach out to Jim Lovell because we, in the future are going to cover the space race and things like that. And we did get a response from the Lovell camp. We can't afford them, but we did get a response. And you know what? I'm not even offended by that because that guy lived through the Apollo 13 experience.
You could crowdsource that.
Yeah, we'll figure that one out. But man, it was like, we threw a Hail Mary and at least we got an answer. It wasn't the answer we wanted, but we got one. So maybe we'll at least get a no from Bruce. That'll be something. He'll know we exist at that point.
You know what? You never know. I mean, if he knows the true story about the regiment there, or in general, he might be interested.
There's a part of me that feels like he does, and there's an equal part of me that feels like he has no clue because he does such a good job engaging.
He's born in the USA.
Yes.
He should have some,
I agree.
some history to that.
Weren't we just talking about that the other day? But point being is he seems like he's so plugged into all these other things, but the fact that he's never once mentioned this, maybe he doesn't know.
Probably doesn't know.
All right, we're doing it. All right, it's official. I
You
said
need
it.
to get him onto the PBS Find Your Roots.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah,
And then there's me in the background come to Monocacy, come to Frederick,
we'll give you a tour.
come to Frederick for free. And he's like, of course it's free. It's a
It's
federal
only a
site.
couple-hour drive. It's fine.
Yeah, he's definitely not
We get people
far.
from New Jersey there all the time.
We really do.
And we'll just tie it into his song "Hungry Heart" because he mentions Baltimore by name in that song. We'll be like, these guys are they're headquartered in Baltimore, so direct connections. It's not, but so they go in this epic charge. Is it a charge or is it just like an advance across a field?
No, the 14th New Jersey, 87th Pennsylvania, some of the 10th Vermont. I mean, they're on it.
All right.
They are charging up the Thomas Yard,
Right up the lane.
right up the lane.
It's impressive to me every time I go to this field, guys, how much is taking place in such a small piece of real estate. We're so used to these battles being fought over these incredible acreages, and specifically here at the Thomas Farm, I mean, this is all more or less in that one field, one and a half fields right there.
I kind of think that might be part of why Gordon says it was one of the hardest fights.
Because it's
I agree.
condensed to that
Because it's a
spot.
condensed time and field.
And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Pat, where we have some real 1861 fighting going on in those fields where lines are just hammering each other before withdrawing or being pushed back or what have you. This is not everybody hunkering down in a trench and stuff.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think people should hear me when I'm saying this. If you've been listening to the show for a long time, I love to poke at the Confederacy and its leadership and things like that. But you should take John Brown Gordon seriously when he tells you what he's interpreting as this is violent, because as we just said a few minutes ago, he's seen it, and he's not just seen it himself, he's experienced it. He is lucky to be breathing at that point, much less witnessing it again. But, and he's there in 65, at the surrender. So, he's seen this war in almost all of its phases. And in his reminiscences, years after this is all over, much like Union U.S. troops, federal troops remembered the bees at the roulette farm, things that stick out in your mind. The third attack at the Thomas farm, in his mind, was like one of the I'll never forget it moments. And you should take that as some sort of big statement to what that fight was. I mean, this is a guy who's seen it all, and yet that sticks out to him.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that he does say post-war about it that I appreciate is, well, even though he does give credit to his guys for winning that fight, he does give some credit to McCausland's men for kind of starting that, for leading the way, so that they knew where to go. So when McCausland makes that second attack, and then there's the counterattack there, and the federal troops are able to push him back again. In that retreat, they'll make one last sort of gasp and try to come back again, and then they're going to be pushed back. And then once that happens, that's when, Early knows, all right, we got to do something here. This is getting ridiculous.
This is the day. Right. This isn't just a couple hours. This is the day.
I want my money, and I want to get across that river. Right. I was not promised that, So anyhow, that's when he calls Gordon out. They've been, these guys have been sitting on reserve in the Buckystown Pike, and, they know what's going on. I mean, they can hear it. They know what's going on, but they've been in reserve. They're relaxing.
And this is where the old Stonewall Brigade is, right? With
Gordon's division. Men. Yes, the old Stonewall Brigade is part of Gordon's larger division, but I think that's a great thing to mention is Gordon's reminiscence talk about his men literally having, how does he put it, the unique experience of watching an engagement. This is like folks at a reenactment, because they're watching the fighting in the distance, they're cheering a good shot and stuff like that, and enjoying the fact that they get to sit out and hang out in the shade.
Oh, well, that's going to change in about 2 milliseconds.
Right.
Yeah, so they're going to be given orders to cross the ford.
And the cheering stopped.
Yeah. Crap.
Yeah.
So they're going to cross that ford. And we forgot to mention, actually, that there was some artillery that's brought over to the Worthington. How many? 2?
Possibly 4.
Possibly 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's only one placement that we actually know about because it's talked about in Glenn Worthington's book. And if you go there today, you're going to see a cannon right beside the house, and that is a location where we know that there was one.
Is this one of my tin guns?
One of the aluminum reproduction tubes.
Yeah, it's a reproduction.
Yeah, I love when I was first exposed to those, and I
get off the cannon.
I didn't sit on it. And yes, get off the cannon. We're big proponents of that. These are not toys to play with, but I don't think anybody had told me that they were tin or aluminum, and I leaned against it and something pinged, and I was like, what the was that? And I sat on it for a couple of days, and I think this was before Matt and I were even directly friends. I only knew him as Ranger Matt, and I asked him, and you were like, oh yeah, they're all aluminum. It was so matter of fact, and I was like, oh, is this normal? What?
Except for the one in front of the visitor center.
No, right.
That's
you do have the real piece, but I
do have the one.
If it looks like a nice bronze brass can, those are all the tin ones. But I just was like, this is a thing we do. And then I went to Fort Stevens, and I was like, these carriages are made of concrete. It's crazy what we can do. It's crazy. All right, so this Jubilee's in. Are the U.S. troops, is Lew Wallace aware that this is a buying of time? Or does he still think we might be able to win this fight?
No. He knows he's buying time. Do the troops know that?
Debatable.
Yeah, debatable.
But Lew Wallace is aware that no matter what, we just need to hold.
He's trying to hold him as long as he can. That's why he burns that bridge.
Right.
So, Gordon is then going to come on the field. So, literally, McCausland is being pushed off. Gordon's coming on.
Simultaneous. So, no breaks for the U.S. troops that just did all that work.
Yeah. Okay. And I can only imagine McCausland's guys going, oh, God, thank God. We don't have to do this again.
And yet they take some pretty, I would say it's a pretty good ribbing from some of the Confederates coming onto the field. Clement Evans would call out to his Georgians. Evans has the largest brigade in Gordon's
Show 'em
division.
what we can do.
And that's exactly right. It says, this is, come on, Georgians, let's show these cavalrymen how to fight. It's just 100 days, men, and can't stand up to our troops.
Yes.
Damn,
So Gordon knew.
sick burn.
Gordon knows at that point that they're facing more than 100-day men, but that does not trickle down
Right.
to the guys who are about to go up against him, and even like Matt said, even General Evans, he doesn't know. So this is gonna be a fight sort of in an echelon.
Have the Louisianans, sorry to interrupt, have the Louisianans gone in yet?
They're part
They're
of this.
about to.
Yeah. I'll get a nugget on that in a minute, but just wanted to know. All right.
So it's a 3-prong attack. Evans is going to attack first. He's going to go over the Tobruk Hill and hit the left flank of the federal line. He will remember this battle for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he will.
Because he's going to get shot, and it's going to hit the housewife in his jacket, and pins are going to go in his body, and they will periodically come out over the years.
Yeah. He's pulling knitting needles out of his flesh for the pretty much the rest of his life.
Shut up.
Nope.
Yep. He gets hit twice, once in the left arm, the other one's in his left breast, hits his breast pocket where his sewing kit, the housewife, is, and blows those pins right into his chest.
Yeah.
So don't tell funny jokes around that guy. Like, I mean, you just get him laughing,
never
and
know,
somebody's
like
like,
a
son of a
pin
bitch, he
pops
spits
out.
out some blood. I mean, that's, look,
I hate that battle.
look, I discover new ways you can be wounded all the time in researching. Honestly, that's add that one to the list. The housewife got me.
Any day he could have been killed by a wound from that battle.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, like a needle slips and hits something.
Yeah,
That's,
punctures a lung, or
holy moly.
Yeah.
And he survives for how long?
He's going to live for a while.
Into the 20th century?
I think early.
Into the early 20th century? Yeah. Unlike us, who were born at the late 20th century.
I love that
Did
term.
he tell you that story?
Mm-mm.
So I almost murdered Matt live on the air with Melissa Wynn from American Battlefield Trust. She was sitting here and we were talking about something, and Matt, providing great context as he always does, but forgetting that I don't want to age, right?
Right.
And he says something about some such and such, they're at the end the late 20th century, and I primitively was like, we were born in the late. I was like, don't ever do that again. I almost reached across the desk. I was like, never say that again, ever.
I kind of like the term, honestly, but yeah, 1911.
Wow. All right. Don't say it again though, for real, please. Listen. Some people age like fine wine. Some people age like a whiskey that's been left open and had other things like turpentine. Some people age like Obie Joyful, okay? And other people age like fine wine. I'm an Obie Joyful over here, so stop. All right. So this third attack coming in is coming in without. There was not a break, but there was a moment of time between first and second attacks. So the federal troops know that were they consistently engaged, or did they get a moment to sort of reestablish themselves in a position? Like, is what I guess what I'm asking is was there a moment to take a breath versus this moment where it seems like there isn't?
Probably, but not very long.
Right, exactly. So they're going to reestablish that federal line on the Thomas farm.
By the fence?
Not that far forward.
Okay.
But just beyond pretty much where the buildings are.
Okay.
And they're going to pull up both of Ricketts, almost forgot his name, both of Ricketts' brigades at that point. So the whole division's going to be in line at that point. And that's your breather just before the infantry fight starts.
Are there any federal reserves? Or is everybody
really,
in?
But they had some troops that were on the other side of the covered wooden bridge that weren't necessarily part of that Union line initially on Airby Church Road, and they're shifted. Once that bridge is burned, they're all shifted to the main Union line.
I was going to say, has the whole battle now more or less shifted over to the Thomas farm? Not to say that they've broken off contact at the Jug Bridge, but has everybody sort of realized that the hurricane force of this is now?
Yeah, the Jug Bridge fight is a whole separate engagement.
Yeah.
They do not pull troops down from there. They have shifted some troops north up to there, or very early in the morning. But Erastus Tyler is doing his own thing.
Okay.
Up there.
All right.
And he is going to have his attention stuck on Robert Rhodes' men for that whole fight.
All right,
Okay?
so we are now...
What's interesting, though, about reserves is that Ricketts and Wallace have been looking for reserves all day and would continue to look for reserves.
Where are my people?
Exactly. There's about 1,000 men from Ricketts' division that have yet to show up.
Yeah.
Oh, like on trains?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. The 6th Maryland, the part of the 122nd Ohio, and a third element as well. 67th Pennsylvania, because they're on the monument, even though they don't fight.
Yeah, they're on the monument, but not at the battle.
Right.
Okay.
They are wanting to get there. The men want to be there, but there is issues with the train. There's issues with their commander, and they will not make it to the field.
Oh, so they don't get... There is no,
Correct.
like...
They are Monocacy's Lost Battalions, as I call them.
But don't, like, I mean, that doesn't sound as cool as, like, the Lost Battalion
I know.
who actually got engaged in the fight
Right.
when the Meuse are gone. Okay, cool.
No, they just got rations.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They got to eat.
Is that an Army of Occupation medals? Shut up. All right, so is it safe to say that this third attack is the main event
Yes.
of this fight? So everything else could be like early rounds, early undercard fights, whatever. But like here in this moment, this is it. This is going to either be success or failure on either side of this line now.
And I think it's at this point where it's good to point. I like to point out to people two things. One, these Union guys have been fighting all day.
Yeah.
They're in constant battle. The Confederates have fresh troops now. So the numbers engaged are about the same, but Gordon's men have been resting all day. Ricketts' men have not. But the Union still has a bit of this element of surprise to a degree, because even though this battle's been going on into the afternoon, most of Gordon's troops still do not know that they're facing these veteran troops. And they talk about never saw green troops shoot better.
Right, exactly. One of my favorite quotes.
Because they're not green, fool.
Yeah, because they're not green.
They're not green.
Yeah, never saw green shoot.
They're red. They're blooded.
And then the federal troops talking about, them sort of gallantly marching onto the field, with their flag, brandishing their flags and all of this. And so, yeah, it's just weird that we're at this point in the battle and they still don't really know what they've gotten into.
Right.
I mean, intelligence is... It's weird, right? At this point in the war, the military, the Bureau of Information, Sharp, things like that. It's incredible how organized and powerful it is, but it's like not a part of this story. There's not a lot of intelligence. There's very minimal. It's like, what did your cavalry see out in front? We're back to almost like the 1861 era of like, the information is not that much further ahead than the cavalry of the army type of thing, right?
Yeah, or maybe if Evans hadn't heckled them, they might have given them a heads up.
Right, exactly.
Oh, they were too busy talking, talking Schmidt. So, okay.
Heads up, guys. It's going to get a little...
Yeah, these guys are
not
amateurs. They're not noobs out there. All right, so what time does this attack kick off, and how long does it last, and is this where the big break happens?
So I'm going to say 3 o'clock.
About 3:30.
About 3:30, and we're going to go an hour and a half.
Yep, that's right.
And then, but is this where the epic retreat, I don't know if that's the right word, but the scramble through the Gambrel property and
scramble through Gambrel. I like it.
We might have to use that.
Do it. All right. You're welcome, guys.
Not that we were actually involved with that site.
No,
but,
we didn't. We might just suggestions might be made.
Sure. But is it on the Thomas farm in this attack where that is broken and is now okay. So 90 minutes of hell, right?
And that's really a great way to put it, Pat, because this is exactly what Gordon's talking about. This is what some of the federal commanders are talking about as this really close-in fighting that eventually will be pushed across the Thomas property back to Araby Church Road, and those same embankments that Tracy's told us about are going to be utilized again.
Yeah, and they're going to break them down. So Evans is going to hit that left flank. He's going to start pushing, and then York is going to come up the middle.
With the Louisianans.
With your Tigers.
Here's why that's relevant. So I, years ago, was going through Confederate Row and Mount Olivet Cemetery, Frederick Second City, and had for a while been researching a guy from the 6th Alabama, a guy named Raisin Pitts, who I forget the lady's name every time I bring this up, but
Raisin Pitts.
Raisin Pitts.
Yep. Yeah, it's, if you read his stone, it says Raisin Pitts, and it got me asking. So I wasn't on the right path, but I was intrigued, as so many others were, about who this guy really is. Like, does your mom not like you? Like, your name's Raisin, dude. And I forgive me, and if you know who you are, like, send us a message so I can shout you out. But I basically was working on this for a while, and I was one of the only people doing it publicly for a while, kind of abandoned it because life decisions and choices had to be made, and I was going other places in life. And she picked up this mantle, basically said, what you did was shit. Your work sucks. She didn't say those things. But she took a different approach and more or less has found out who this guy really is. But different day, we'll get into Raisin Pitts. But walking that same row, I stopped dead in my tracks because an experience that, again, in a macabre way, most people either will not admit or will admit. It's trippy, and you either do and don't want to see your own name on a headstone. It's kind of a weird experience. And if you go to Confederate Road today, there is Private Patrick J. McGuire, Company C, 7th Louisiana Infantry, mortally wounded on July 9th, dies July 10th, 1864. And I'm like, yo, not even just the first and last name, but you got my middle initial. And he's like roughly the age I was when I discovered that. He was the same age when he died. And I was like, what is happening here? And like, sometimes I have I guess I'm agnostic with the concept of reincarnation. I don't think I'm a disbeliever of it, but I don't know that I outright believe in it. But like in that moment, standing there, I was like, is this why I am so damn interested in this battle? But like, it was so weird to be like, not only the first, but like my middle initial too. Like, son of a bitch. But so that's why I was like, where are the Louisianans? Because this guy that may or may not be me from the Civil War is about to bite it real hard. And it's this fight. So that's why I was like, where are the Louisianans? Because I need to bring up this guy. So if you know more about Patrick McGuire of the 7th Louisiana, I would love to hear about it. Probably isn't me, though. So how does the spine break? Is it all in one epic moment, or is it a protracted sort of like little bits of it start to peel off?
I think it's a slowly protracted experience.
Is there an outright order to just get out, or is it just like a breakdown and people just understand
I think it's all happening kind of at the same time. So even after York goes up the middle, then a little bit later, Terry kind of sweeps through by the, along the river, and then he's going to come up on the right flank, and that's really going to rout them at that point. So they're kind of already, done and en route to get out of there. And Wallace, he knows it. And
but they're limbering up guns, and they're just getting the hell out of Dodge at this point.
And he knows that he's kept them there long enough that the Confederates are going to have to camp overnight, and that they've got enough wounded and people dying that they're not going anywhere for the rest of the day.
Fight lost, but mission accomplished.
Exactly.
Yep.
So he kept them there. They did their job. And now we're going to call for retreat.
What is happening outside of the sphere of this fight right now? Grant was aware enough of this to send troops up to support it. Obviously, this is it's probably not a story where he just said send them the troops and then disengage. So he's probably been wondering what's been happening.
Yeah, and I believe it's when I'm trying to think. When they've left Harper's Ferry and they're on their way to Frederick, then they know like something's happening here, and that's when they, send the 3rd Division of the 6th Corps up, and then it's shortly after that Wallace is then able to say to him, "This is early. You've got to get troops into Washington."
That's what I was going to ask. So like, when does he backfill the fortifications for the aftermath?
So that's when he's gonna start sending the 1st and 2nd Divisions in.
Yep.
What is the strength of Washington's garrison at the time before troops get back into it?
So it's a really good question because you almost have two different garrisons going on. You have the southern ring of forts, those forts that are surrounding the approaches to Washington from the south up through Alexandria
and all that.
Like that. There's around 35,000 men in those forts.
That's a lot of guys.
It's a lot of guys. There is a big chunk of that defensive ring, though, that has been denuded of troops. Okay,
for the overland campaign.
For the overland campaign, or at least the continuation of the overland campaign.
Right.
And that's why the northern ring of forts is so bereft of troops. There's just
you're
not
talking
that
like
many.
where Montgomery County borders, like so Silver Spring, Maryland, things like that. Because is that one of the reasons Early goes the way he goes? Because he knows that's the undefended part, or is that all happenstance?
That's happenstance.
Okay.
Yeah. And also because of how the Army of the Potomac has moved south towards Richmond and along with the Army of the James is kind of wrapping itself around Richmond and Petersburg, Early couldn't go straight north.
Okay, right.
And besides, that wasn't his orders anyways. He was to go to Lynchburg first.
Right, the
Take
Valley.
care of that situation.
Valley's primary objective.
Right.
All right, so Lou knows we might have lost this fight, but we accomplished this delay. These guys are camping. Grant has successfully moved now how many troops back in to bolster that 35 on the south? How many troops has he put back into the forts?
So I don't actually know the troop strength of the 1st and 2nd Division of the 6th Corps. It is multiple thousands of men. But it's not just the 6th Corps. You've got the Veteran Reserve Corps is being called out. You've got some emergency militia from the very clerks of the War Department being armed at one point.
What, like stews, like pigeons out there, like administrative guys that push pens and not bullets?
Yes, exactly.
Oh man, looks shaky with the manual of arms.
Probably very shaky with the manual of arms. But what's one of my favorite visuals of this period, and I know it didn't go down like this, but the Union 19th Corps has been advanced from Louisiana and was going to be sent to the Army of the Potomac to help with the situation around Petersburg. And they don't even stop. I always imagined there was a guy out at Fortress Monroe just going, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Just keep on going. Just don't stop.
Right. So the 19th Corps is going to arrive a little while after the 6th Corps divisions are there. There's a great account of Lincoln meeting the 6th Corps divisions on the 6th Street Wharf. I actually was able to say that for once. And he is going to be right there at the wharf, which is now the Naval Yard, where these guys are unloading and marching right through Washington, D.C. to get to the forts on the outskirts of the district. And Lincoln makes a quip where he says, you must be, oh gosh, I think it's something along the lines of, you must be quick if you want to get early.
Oh, yeah. Play a little smart, like dad joke and also pun at the same time.
Right.
Dude, he's such a clever guy. I love Abe. So the 10th and the 11th, in the days and in the aftermath of this are interesting to me. Jubal Early has these mini adventures as he moves through Lower Frederick County and Montgomery County. Parker and I accidentally found a connection to this story to a church Parker was a member of, and when I was younger, I grew up going to the Catholic Church of St. Rosa Lima down there, and there is one of Jubal Early's soldiers buried in the church there from one of those, out front cavalry sort of stories, and it's like, oh, this story is here as well. I forget, it might have actually been at Monocacy with the same unnamed ranger that might have told me the BS I've referenced earlier, but somebody asked. I loved the question, even though everybody took it as immature. It's a very practical one. Somebody asked how these soldiers went to the bathroom, while they were on these marches, on one of the, I think it was for the 149th battle anniversary. It was the year before the 150, I think is where I heard this.
That would be 149th. Well done.
Yes, I can do math. I can do some basic math. I might not be an astrophysicist, but I can do some basic math. But Jubal Early's got a ton of guys who are exhausted, and they're also sick. There's a bunch of guys that have got.
He takes some pretty bad heat casualties.
Yeah, and so there's a whole lot.
A lot.
That's what I mean. There's a whole different story in the aftermath of this, and we won't get too much into that because I want to cover without getting into the deep story of Fort Stevens, just sort of how this campaign ends, and we'll come back to Fort Stevens another day here on the podcast. But what is Lew Wallace doing on July 9th and 10th as Jubal Early is moving down the counties towards the doorstep of Washington?
10th and 11th.
What did I say?
You said 9th and 10th.
Yeah, I can't do math. Even though I said I could do math,
he was busy on the 9th.
I can't do math. What is he doing on the 10th and the 11th? Is he all the way back in Baltimore, or do they have a line somewhere?
He's getting back to Baltimore. Okay. So they're going to take the train that brought them there left shortly after fighting started.
Yeah.
They got out of Dodge. And then, so the troops had to walk back to Monrovia for the most part. Mm-hmm. And there were some that straggled. I mean, there's different stories of guys and their adventures of, getting back to Baltimore. But most of them got on the train, went back to Baltimore. But that's what Wallace does as well. And then from there, he goes into D.C. He's going to take the train back down because he talks about seeing the dust being kicked up from federal troops making their way back into the Capitol and the dust being kicked up from the Confederate troops making their way towards the Capitol.
So when Lou goes, does he go with his force or just himself?
The 3rd Division of the 6th Corps is going to be sent to Washington.
Okay.
So whether or not he goes separately or with them, I'm not. I've never read anything about that.
I don't believe that he is moving with troops.
Yeah, it sounded like he.
He was coming to give a report, more or less.
That, and he still is supposed to defend Baltimore because you've got Bradley Johnson and Harry Gilmore running around.
Turn them loose.
I was going to say, we're not going to do the Johnson-Gilmore raid today, but in placing this whole story, when did they depart from Jubal Early's force? On the 9th?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so as this breaks in, they're like, see ya. Gilmore's like, I'm going to go home real quick, see my mom.
Yeah.
Again, we'll get there. So they get to the outskirts of Washington on the 11th then, right? Or is it the morning of the 12th?
No, it's about midday on the 11th.
Midday.
Yeah.
It's hot. These guys have been marching. They've been doing a whole bunch of fighting. They got smacked in the face, even though they won. I mean, they took a shot. The short version, how does this all end? Is this just all this big anticlimactic? This was a lot for nothing.
Early's given a lot of flack for not attacking, but his guys were straggling.
What could you attack?
You get them back together, and there's also something to be said that he knew at that point he wasn't going to get in. So he's got to protect this wagon train he's got as well. He's got a huge wagon train.
Jubal Early does.
Yes.
It's all that cash he's got.
Supplies, cash.
Yeah.
All the stuff he's taken.
Yeah. So
And
he's got to get them back across the river.
even if he doesn't realize, or even if he thinks the forts are fairly poorly manned, he's been taking a lot of artillery fire from those forts. And his troops, like Tracy said, are very strung out and they're exhausted. So
big guns in those forts, too.
There's some 100-pound Parrots in those forts.
That's what I
Yeah,
mean.
there's some
big
very
boys.
big guns.
Yeah. So this is a huge story. I mean, if you think about the stakes here, right? We have the presidential election of 1864
You had the president
happening.
under fire.
Right. Right. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I want to tell that in the Fort Stevens story. But,
It's pretty important to the campaign
It
and
is.
why
I would
it's
say,
so significant.
so we can touch on it for a second. He's the only president to ever come under direct fire from an enemy, right? What are you doing, Matt? Why are you shaking me off?
There is some evidence to suggest...
George doesn't count. He wasn't president yet.
No. Madison may have come under fire during the Battle of Bladensburg in the War of 1812.
Really?
He will arrive on the field at Bladensburg when there's fighting going on. At the very end of the battle, there is some evidence to suggest he may have come under fire. But Lincoln, yes, is definitely under fire at Fort Stevens.
Maryland, by the way, has a theme of successful delays because the Battle of North Point is literally the same story of Monocacy, more or less. It's this massive delaying action for this other thing that's going to happen, but the delay is where the victory really, in the loss, is where the victory was gained. Are you familiar?
I'm not.
All right, so short version, Battle of North Point, British troops coming up to Baltimore, run
British
into
troops.
U.S. troops that they're not expecting to fight as hard and last as long as they do in Dundalk, of all places, even though I was crapping on them earlier.
You were.
And the U.S. troops there fight long enough. They lose the fight, but they fight long enough that the defenses of Baltimore are able to get their proverbial crap together and get this defensive posturing done right to hold the city, and they do, and that's why we have our sweet national anthem now. But essentially, it's the same story. It's like this is a tactical loss, but overall, this was a victory because the delay was the point, and that's where the similarities in these stories strike me, and it's all Maryland, baby. It's crab cakes
There you go.
and
All Maryland.
It's crab cakes and wasting the enemy's time. That's what we do here in Maryland. Come at us. So when you guys wrap this up at the top secret site, do you just succinctly say, and they got to Washington and they didn't do much? Or like, how do you wrap it all up? Like so that people understand how important this campaign was, not just because, there was a few names you might know and because this guy wrote Ben-Hur after the war. But like I said, this is a major high stakes moment if things don't go the way they go. I mean, our election could have been different, which by default could have changed the nations potentially. How do you guys wrap all that up? I mean, it's a big concept.
I think there's a couple different layers to it. There's at the federal and state level, but the state level obviously influences the federal level in the sense that you have this election. Had they gotten into Washington, which really could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, I think they got a lot closer probably than they expected. And, that could that have turned the tide? It's just like we talked about that was the gamble. It's not, we're going to get in war over, but, that they could sue for peace, that, they're always hoping that England and France will then want to come back in and recognize
sorry, that ship
them.
sailed in 62,
that ship
fellas.
sailed, absolutely, I agree. But, I think it's always still a hope there for them. But one of the other things that kind of comes into play, and it's particularly with everything that Early has collected as he's gone through Maryland, and we talked about the Maryland legislature meeting around that time. Well, they couldn't meet because of Early coming through. They weren't sure what was going to happen. But, by the time they meet, their constituency is not happy. They are not happy that Early was able to get into Maryland, that he came through, that caused all this destruction, that he ransomed these towns, ransacked farms, collected all of these supplies, collected money. They're very unhappy. And it really, I think, pushes the legislators to pass this loyalty oath that you're required to take to then vote in the election.
Interesting.
So it's indirectly really kind of turns the tide, I think, there, because the legislator they pass this sort of you have to sign this loyalty oath, and then if you don't, you can't vote, and that vote is the one where they're voting to emancipate the enslaved in Maryland.
Fantastic. How did that go today? If you had to sign things before you voted.
Right.
Real quick to you in this conversation here, Matt. My brain just actually stopped, so maybe I don't have a question for you in this moment.
Well, the election that Tracy's referring to occurs in early October is when the voting days are. It's 2 days of voting. And what's fascinating about it is not only do we have the loyalty oath for the civilians of Maryland, but the soldier vote is incredibly important to this, both to Lincoln's reelection in November, but also to this vote on the new state constitution. And it is the soldiers' vote that pushes the Constitution, the 64 Constitution, the one that will end slavery in Maryland, over the top.
Yep.
Correct. And I remember my question, so I don't know what it was, but thank you. So the Maryland State Legislature meets in Frederick, Maryland in the early parts of this war because
they sure do.
Annapolis didn't be a friendly place for them to do so.
Well, there's a lot of federal troops in it.
I know. We'll talk about all that in another episode because, again, Maryland's history in the Civil War is its
Butler.
own rabbit hole. But they are back in Annapolis by this point. The conversation is not here at Kemp Hall. Those are in the halls of our state Congress. Okay.
Right.
All right. Just wanted to, for my own brain. So this battle not just has a major impact on the war, on the presidential election, but it also has an impact on the state's constitution at that point. So this is big. And so that's why I ask, how do you do it succinctly? Because we've spent a little over 3 hours, and I still feel like with all the experience you guys have, my own just curiosity, we could spend additional hours in this conversation. So when you don't get that opportunity with, families visiting, individuals visiting, you got, ranger programs have to be more or less succinct and confined to certain time constraints just for, productivity and efficiency at work. How do you do that so that people understand what this is and why it's important?
And that is sort of the main goal. The main goal is to have people understand the significance of the battle and what it did. And I think a lot of the time you can see people are genuinely shocked that they had no idea that, because they're surrounded by the Gettysburg, and Antietam and Manassas and all these big battles, and a lot of people haven't even heard of Monocacy.
Oh, yeah, I can tell you an author, a big name, I won't say his name, but a big name author I texted Matt about the other night, because I guess this book came out a while ago, but I just heard about it, and on the cover, it's about Gettysburg, and it says the final Confederate invasion.
Yeah.
We don't even say his name.
I've seen that.
But I said to Matt, I was like, how does this not piss you off? And he was like, oh, it does.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about it.
All right, well.
Yeah.
We need to get that guy on the show just so I can berate him.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but
it's
I think people are genuinely.
But that sounds like
surprised.
he's completely either unaware or doesn't care. But either way, that's a shame on his part. But it's like most people don't realize that it happened. It had this importance. We play that dangerous what if game. We try to avoid it because what ifs they didn't happen. But it's like this is a place where you could flirt with that idea and start to have profound thoughts of what would have been different.
Well, I often say to people that I think that this battle isn't well known because of what it did.
It saved the Union?
Because of what it did. And had it not happened, it would be in every history book. Confederates walked in to the Capitol,
like 1814.
the federal Capitol in 1864.
Right.
And people would say, why didn't anybody try to stop them?
Right.
So because I think of what it accomplished, it gets kind of overshadowed by everything else that was going on.
I just realized in saying that we're talking 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's an enemy force at the door of Washington 50 years after there was one successfully in the city. I mean, there's people alive that witnessed both of these things
and
potentially.
They wanted to do some damage. I remember reading a letter from one of the Confederate soldiers, and he talks about his comrades. He was afraid of what his comrades were going to do when they got to the city because they were so distressed and upset over what they had seen in Virginia. And he knew that they were going to burn. I mean, they might not have been there very long, but they were ready to tear it up when they got there.
And we see some of that for the destruction that occurs in Silver Spring.
I was going to say part of Montgomery County incurs that.
Well, the governor's house, governor for governor.
Right.
Well, to be fair, one of ours was an active governor, and your governor was a little bit like out of office at that point. So, but whatever. This story is fascinating, and Tracy, I gotta say thank you. Like I've been waiting years to tell this story because from day one, this was a story I knew I wanted you on the show because between your brilliance and Matt's supporting brilliance over here, this was going to be an incredible experience for our listeners. We have had tons of topics where we know the topic we want to talk about, and it's like, who would we get to talk about it? With this conversation, when we had it back in season 1 about, when do we get to this? It was always you. And I just want to say thank you because it was even better than I imagined it was going to be.
Oh, well, good. I appreciate that because I feel like I've been there so long. I feel like I don't remember and know a lot of the stuff that I used to talk about. And then I'm like, I defer to Matt.
And you know what? And in these moments, that's why this was such a great experience for me personally. Sitting here is like this. That's why I kind of positioned myself to like this is how I'm talking now because this is both of you guys. But I'm impressed by both of you every day for what you guys do professionally. I get the pleasure of working with him very directly, and he's helped me elevate my game. But I can see how this community of like mirroring your peers and colleagues, and it's just working for everybody because this was brilliant, and I can see that Matt gets to engage in that brilliance every day at work, and that's got to be awesome for you, dude.
It is.
And by default, it was awesome for me in this moment, and hopefully all of you out there enjoyed this look at one of the most important stories of the American Civil War that you're probably not going to come across unless you get up into this area. I don't imagine in Tennessee or up in Pennsylvania they're having much conversations about little fight in Frederick, Maryland, but you absolutely should. It affected everything.
And you can find it on the internet.
That's true.
And learn all about it.
You can also find a ton of crap on the internet, so just be careful.
But look at the actual Park Service site.
Yeah, the one that may or may not be affiliated with you jabronis. No.
Right.
You guys are incredible. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you do any like public social media work like Matt and I do? Like we're on the Instagram pretending to be historians. Do you do any of that?
I really don't.
All right. I was just give you the opportunity to
she
shout out.
She actually has a life.
Yeah, I know she does. She's cool, dude. Like she's not a basement troll like we are.
Right.
I know, but I wanted to be here to be part of the.
I'm glad
the
you got
trolls.
in studio. That was the only caveat I had to Matt was I was like, if Tracy's coming on the show, which we wanted, there's no option. We always give our guests like the option. You want to come in studio, you want to do Zoom. There was never an option for you.
Yeah.
You had to
my
come in
husband
studio.
even said that this we had to cancel the first time. He was like, "Well, it's a podcast. You could probably do it from." I'm like, "No.
This one is
it's mommy's night out."
Yes. Also with two like weird nerds, but I'm glad that we made it. I'm also glad that we did reschedule, because if you can hear my voice now, 2 weeks ago when we were supposed to do this, I was on death's door.
You did.
In fact,
you did sound like death warmed over.
Our producer is not here in studio. This is one of the very rare recordings where we have an in-studio guest that our producer, Parker, is not here. So shout out, buddy. We miss you. We love you. I hope you feel better, because I didn't give it to him, but on his own children brought home the plague, and he is now currently down from it, and he sounds worse than what I did 2 weeks ago. I sent you that miserable looking selfie.
Yeah.
He is that selfie. Like, that was a picture.
I enjoyed the nasal strip.
Oh, I couldn't breathe without it.
Fantastic.
Listen, breathing is something I desire to keep doing, and I wasn't doing it well that day. All right. This has been great. So get out to the unofficial park site in Frederick County, the one that focuses on.
It's an official site.
No, it is official, but on our show, I don't know the right way to dance around this anymore. You know where they work. All right, just go to their site. Engage in the story, ask great questions, and you'll be exposed to something that I think would tremendously shape the way you look at the war as a whole, which we're all doing nationally anyway. But this is a good substantive way to do it that'll kind of key you into some bigger elements of the story you might not know of. And again, one last time, Tracy, thank you so very much. So Matt, getting out of here, we have a lot coming up.
We do.
In the second half of season 2. Actually, we're in the summer blitz now. So in addition to our From the Field stuff coming out, just put your helmets on and get down. There are shells coming at you in the way of episodes pretty much weekly, all through July, most of August potentially, between the July Blitz and the Summer Offensive. We got a lot for you, and we thank you for listening for all that. And then for one last time, for everybody who's out there enjoying the show, we say thank you to start, because every time we look at our numbers, it blows us away, and we're very humbled and very grateful. Even as recently as today, before we got to recording, Matt and I were having one of these, can you believe this crap kind of conversations? Like, this is awesome how this ride went from a real literal closet to a functioning studio that tons of people all over the world get to hear Matt and mine's weird exploring of history. So thank you for that. But if you want to help to keep that sort of momentum going, go to your favorite podcast apps, leave us a 5-star rating, leave us a review, share it with someone you know, and then go over to our social medias, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Just search for the History Things Podcast, and make sure you jump on the train and you get with all the crazy that we're doing. Because at this point, season 5, Matt, is it out of control?
Oh, I don't know about out of control, but it's intense.
It's not like Mach 2 with our hair on fire out of control, but like, we're in some place that we never thought we'd be, and it's incredible, and we're enjoying it. So just get with it while the momentum's rolling. But everybody out there, just get buckled up. Have fun this summer. Be safe. Happy 4th of July. Thank you all for listening to our show. For our guest today, Tracy Evans. For my co-host with the most, Matt Borders, I'm your co-host, Pat McGuire. This is the History Things Podcast coming at you. We will see you all later.
Have a good night.